So would you like to watch the Thom Hartmann program, all 3 hours of our program, anytime you'd like? It's available. Would you like to hear special content where we talk about, what the billionaires are up to, or climate change, or the newest things in science? There's all kinds of great content like that. That's also available. The place to find all this is the Thom Hartmann channel over on Patreon. Patreon.com, Patreon.com. /Thom Hartmann, ThomHartmann, all run together. Patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. And there, when you become a supporter of the program through Patreon, you have access to the full 3-hour show every day, anytime you want, any place you want, and special content that we put up every single week that is unique specifically to our Patreon page. So check it out. Book Club today, we're reading from Ralph Nader's new book, How the Rats Reformed the Congress, a fable. It's fiction. Chapter 1, Invader. It was one of those uncomfortable morning strategy sessions with his senior staff. For House Speaker Reginald Blamer, the discomfort was in having to figure ways to continue blocking a long overdue raise in the federal minimum wage for many millions of low-income workers when he knew in his gut it was not the right thing to do. We're in the crosshairs, he would say, starting such congressional meetings in his spacious office. Not that his anxiety would cause him to renege on the implicit promise he had made to the big boys to stop the move in Congress to raise the minimum. But there was still background anxiety. After all, politicians are only human, and like many, Speaker Blamer came from a large family that had lived through tightened circumstances. His father was a tavern keeper and his mother a seamstress. Deep anxiety, however, did have one inherent comfort at such morning gatherings. It tended to work in mysterious ways to overcome his morning constipation, the constant bane of the Speaker's existence. Holding down 30 million workers, including among them many conservative voters who, when adjusted for inflation, were making less today than workers in 1968, bothered the very private, self-censored, psychosomatic recesses of the Speaker's conscience. And so, not surprisingly, Speaker Blamer felt the onset of a solid bowel movement. He excused himself and repaired to his large private bathroom. As he sat down in the broad porcelain toilet, he felt that the expected discharge would be ample and prompt. No straining today. After quick breaks of wind, the Speaker heard a sound inside the toilet, but it wasn't from his bowels. Lifting himself up a bit, he looked down and saw the head of a mostly submerged black rat closely eyeing his bottom. "Yow, yow, yow," bellowed the Speaker as he straightened up and slammed the cover down. Alarmed, the staff rushed to the bathroom door to respectfully call, "Speaker Blamer, are you all right? Do you need help?" They dared not open the door. The Speaker did not tolerate any exposure of his privacy, especially being seen in his corpulent native suit. Another more normal person might have replied, "Yeah, I'm okay. It's just that there's a rat in the toilet bowl." But Speaker Blamer was not a normal person. He has had to be super cunning to get to his present situation in life. Being cunning means that you can instantly sense danger, being as alert as, say, a rat. And Speaker Blamer was already imagining the deriding headlines in the late-night show jokes if he disclosed what really prompted his impulsive cries of sheer terror as he leapt from the throne. So he replied, "Nothing much, boys. Just one of those sudden spasms I get once in a while. Sure comes on fast. It goes away fast, too. I'll be right out." Rejoining the staff at the head of the conference table, albeit full of gas and undischarged wastes, the Speaker went through the checklist for crushing the hopes of the downtrodden multitudes. His chief of staff reviewed the usual elements of the campaign against workers. First off, the Speaker will say, "I always thought that if you raise the price of anything, you get less of it. The proposal to raise the minimum wage is a job killer." "Good soundbite," said his research assistant. The Speaker nodded gravely, though when he heard the word bite, he silently winced. The operations assistant counted off the usual reliable economics professors who could supply objective warnings about losses of jobs in recession. The Fast Food and Big Box Retailer Association had begun a large ad buy on television and radio with the announcer's stentorian voices of dire gravity. The K Street lobbyists were already in action on Capitol Hill, marshaling the corporate PACs to make sure this drive was on the front burner, hinting to legislators that their employers might see this as a litmus test for their donations. Op-eds, letters to the editors, and editorial condemnation of economically disruptive higher wages and layoffs was already in the pipeline. About to burst, the Speaker could not wait to end the meeting. "Okay, fellows, you seem to have the situation well in hand. It's not the first time we had to fight off this wage grab. Get to work." They all scattered, including an irrelevant intern who wondered to herself whether paying members of Congress would mean the government would end up with less of them. Paying members of Congress more, excuse me. The moment the door to his spacious office closed, the speaker literally lunged to his private toilet, whereupon he unloaded a vast quantity of feces, soft and semi-hard, 3 bursts worth. Before he could enjoy a moment of quiet satisfaction, a shrill shriek lifted him up as his eyes bulged. It was the black rat swimming in the bowl, propelling the terrified cry, yow, yow, yow. Again, he slammed down the toilet seat, kept his hand on the flush toilet handle, gritting his teeth as if to say, on the way to oblivion, you dirty rat. His longtime secretary heard his yell and rushed to his bathroom. Mr. Speaker, what happened? Are you okay? Recovering his composure, he replied, I'm okay, Sarah, just more of those sudden spasms. I've got to get some physical therapy. By the way, did you schedule that fundraiser next week for an hour later? Yes, I did, Mr. Speaker, Sarah replied, sounding very relieved. Arriving home that early evening, he sat down to a healthy diet supper prepared by his adoring wife, Regina. Their 3 children were grown up, living in distant states, so they were empty nesters. You seem unusually agitated, honey, said Regina. Did you have a hard day? It seems every day is hard in these times, he replied, shrugging off her concern. What a great meal always, Regina. Now I need some relaxing reading. Do you know where we put that colorful book of animals that we got as a wedding gift, anniversary gift years ago? Why, yes, Reginald. It came in 3 volumes, mammals, reptiles, and insects. Tell me which one you want, and I'll get it for you. Mammals, he replied. Sitting in his study, the speaker started reading about the rat. The word rat is derived from the Latin rodere, which means to gnaw. Rats produce litter several times a year with high infant mortality. If seen as weak, newborns are eaten by their parents and their stronger siblings. Over the centuries, rats have developed uncanny abilities to survive dangers everywhere, especially those produced by their close proximity to humans, whose detritus and garbage ironically provide the means by which they prosper and create new nests. Rats live everywhere, underground, in sewers, in buildings, etc. Ralph Nader.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And top of the morning to you. Happy Monday. Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Why is it that the press, the media, to a large extent, and so many politicians, including Democratic politicians, say that it's a centrist position to say that there's no way that we can have free health care for all Americans, there's no way we can have free college education for all Americans, and there's no way we can fund a Green New Deal? Why is that centrist? These are positions that more than half, in the case of health care, more than 70%, in the case of free education, well over 65% of all Americans support. So, I mean, if you're just looking at it like a mathematician, okay, if you've got, it's not a plurality, it's a majority. More than half of Americans want Medicare for all, want free college for all, very straightforward stuff, and frankly would like a Green New Deal. Now, the details of the Green New Deal are not really clear enough. The public polling on that is really all that accurate because we haven't had much of a public debate about it. But then into this confusion steps Howard Schultz. If you want to see Donald Trump reelected as president, then throw some money into a Howard Schultz campaign, right? This guy, he says he's a Democrat for life. He bought Starbucks, or came in as CEO of Starbucks. Not sure if he bought it or not, but how the whole story. But anyhow, he came into Starbucks when it was a little company with 100 employees and just a couple of stores. They didn't even sell coffee by the cup. They sold beans, coffee beans. And he came in and he built this into a worldwide empire. And good on him. And we need to acknowledge that. It was a great effort. And he's been largely socially progressive. But this whole thing of, well, I'm socially progressive but fiscally conservative, what the hell does that mean? Why is it that every developed country in the world, you look at the 34 Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development countries, the 34 OECD countries, the 34 countries that, and this includes countries as small as Costa Rica, the 34 countries who are the most developed functioning democracies in the world. You look at those 34 countries, and 33 of them have health care as a right for all their citizens. Switzerland has a system. It's not government run, but it's entirely nonprofit. To be a hospital in Switzerland, you have to be nonprofit. To be a health insurance company in Switzerland, you have to be nonprofit. So, they run very much like a government would, where the first mission is not to maximize shareholder value. The first mission is to provide unneeded service to the people who are customers. Switzerland is kind of the outlier among the 34 OECD countries. Every other one of those countries has a program that the government runs. Now, some of them, like the UK's National Health Service, the government actually owns the hospitals and employs the doctors. With systems like Canada's or France's, the government doesn't own hospitals and doesn't employ doctors. Instead, they just write the checks. They pay the bills. They play the role of health insurance company. It's what happens here in the United States with Medicare and Medicaid. These are called single-payer systems. We have one here. We also have a socialized medicine system in the United States. The Trump administration and Republicans for years and years have been doing everything they can to take it apart and to damage it. It's called the Veterans Administration, or the VA program, right? And the Veterans Administration Hospital. This is socialized medicine. But now Howard Schultz is coming along, and he's got a book out, so he's doing his book tour. And the question in my mind is he just doing this to jack sales of his book? Or is he doing this because he's seriously considering a run for president, which is essentially what he said on 60 Minutes last night? And by the way, the guy that he's hired to manage his PR is Steve Schmidt. Steve Schmidt, the guy, who used to run the John McCain campaign. Well, when he ran the John McCain campaign, he was actually working for this massive public relations company. It's called Edelman. Schmidt got to know Schultz through Edelman's partnership with Starbucks, writes Brian Schwartz over at CNBC. So Edelman is a PR company that Schwartz had hired to promote Starbucks, and Schmidt worked for back when John McCain hired them. In October, Schultz also hired Cheryl Cook, longtime executive vice president at Edelman. Again, the guys who ran John McCain's campaign are now working with Howard Schultz. I mean, if you recall, in the 2000 election, Ralph Nader got more votes in Florida than, he got, 97,000 votes, as I recall? Maybe it was 79,000. It was something like that. Fewer than 100,000, but certainly more than the 500 or so that George W. Bush claimed he won Florida by. The subsequent recount showed that actually Al Gore won Florida by at least 500 or 1,000 votes, depending on whether you counted, intention of the voter and all that kind of stuff. But so, we know that the Supreme Court stole the election in 2000 from Al Gore and gave it to George W. Bush. It's just, but had Ralph Nader not been in that race, there wouldn't, they couldn't have stolen Florida. And there have been a number of other cases of this, John Anderson and others. By the way, the second hour of our program, the full hour, Congressman Ro Khanna of California is going to be here taking your calls. And then, if you want to lobby him about something or whatever, you can give him a shout here in the second hour. In our third hour, Medea Benjamin, the founder of Code Pink and Global Exchange, will be with us. We're going to be talking about Venezuela and getting into an in-depth thing about that. So political strategists from both sides of the aisle say that by enlisting the help of this PR team, that's Steve Schmidt and Cheryl Cook, that Schultz is clearly signaling that he's exploring a run for president. And then he says, this is what he said on 60 Minutes. He says, every American deserves the right to have access. Access is the magic word here, right? We all have access to quality health care. If you're bleeding, you can show up at an emergency room. That's a law that Ronald Reagan got passed through Congress in 1986, as I recall. Hospital emergency rooms can't turn you down. So, right now, all Americans have access to quality health care under certain circumstances, like if they're bleeding. So anyhow, back to Howard Schultz. He says, every American deserves the right to have access to quality health care, but what the Democrats are proposing is something that is as false as the wall, and that is free health care for all, which the country cannot afford. If we can't afford it, why are we paying an extra $500 billion a year in profit margin to giant insurance companies like United Healthcare and Aetna to manage it for us? I mean, if we can't afford it, why are we letting them skim 10, 20% off the top of every healthcare dollar spent in America? Or virtually every. Why are we letting the drug companies rip us off when other countries don't allow them to rip them off? Why are we promoting for-profit hospitals, which are skimming money off the top like there's no tomorrow, when other countries require hospitals to be not-for-profits? Why are we doing this? Well, we're doing this very simply because our political class, including people like Howard Schultz, have been wholly bought and paid for by the billionaires who own the health insurance companies or run the health insurance companies, people like Stephen Hemsley of United Healthcare, and the billionaires who own and run the hospitals, people like Rick Scott down in Florida, who owned one of the biggest hospital chains until he was busted for fraud and had to pay a multi-hundred million dollar fine. So he took his hundreds of millions of dollars and went off and became governor of Florida. Now he's the senator. This is how they do it. They end up owning politicians. And then once they own the politicians, what do? Well, here's an example. Jordan Barab writing for Raw Story. This is from the DC report. You ever heard of beryllium? Beryllium is a metal. It's part of the periodic table. It's a metal. It is poisonous. It's in the cadmium kind of part of the, there's a word for that part of the periodic table. And like cadmium, it causes cancer. It's a carcinogen. And in this report, they tell the story of this one guy. His name is Davis, is his last name. Wardell Davis. And he was 24 years old, and for a year he worked at a Navy contractor where they were blasting coal dust off ships that had hauled this coal slag. And that blasting produced enormous amounts of beryllium in the air, which he inhaled. A couple of years later, the guy is dying. Can't breathe. Beryllium poisoning. So the Obama administration put forward a plan to tighten that. Well, it became the rules. This is OSHA's standard to protect workers from the disabling and deadly effects of beryllium exposure. They've been working on this new standard for 20 years. It was an agreement between the main beryllium producer, Materion, and the United Steelworkers, who want this protection for their union members. It's going to cost industry about $12 million a year, about $1,000 a worker, to prevent workers from ending up with cancer, lung cancer, deadly, painful lung cancer. And who's leading the charge to weaken the protections? A congressman by the name of Bradley Byrne, Republican from Alabama. He's chair of the Subcommittee on Workforce Protection, or he was until the Democrats came in. He wrote to the U.S. Office of Management and Budget, asking them to weaken the workers' protections. The article, quote, much of Byrne's letter was taken word for word from comments submitted by the ABMA's lobbying firm, Squire Patton Boggs. Former senior partner at Patton Boggs is a guy named Mark Cohen. He was the head of OSHA under Reagan. And he's advising Byrne and Robert Whitman, the Republican from Virginia, in how to, do away with these workplace protections so that the companies can save $1,000 per worker and the workers can end up with lung cancer. This all, increases GDP, right? Because when somebody gets cancer, that increases GDP. It's a $500,000 diagnosis for the hospitals, for the insurance companies, for the doctors, for everybody. Economic activity increases when you get cancer, don't you know? Radical Republicans doing this. This is the kind. If you got somebody like Howard Schultz, an independent, in this race, you're going to see more of this kind of thing because you're going to end up electing Republicans for a Republican president. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris pulls 20,000 people in Oakland. We've got some great candidates on the Democratic side. We'll be right back. It's 18 minutes and a half past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So what are your thoughts on a third-party contender in this year's race? What would you say to Howard Schultz if you could talk to him? Welcome back. Let's pick up some phone calls here. John in Minneapolis. Hey, John, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Yeah, I just wanted to say it's purely about money and just all of the interest in health. I'm talking about healthcare. All of the interests that, prevent us from having a truly either nonprofit, government-run healthcare like the Swiss, or or directly administered, type of system, because of course it makes absolute sense. You can't, you can slice and dice the numbers. We spend more than any other country in the world on healthcare, and a good portion of it is not going to the patients. It's not even going to the professional people that are taking care of the patients. And that's what we labor under, and we would have much better results. I've worked in healthcare. I'm also a victim of the expensive costs of it, since I'm COBRAing my insurance right now. I retired at 62, and my wife, even with Medicare, is spending probably about $15,000 a year on her health care.
Wow.
And then if you add the cost of my own, it's something like $20,000 for a few years until I get Medicare. But, United Healthcare it's headquartered here, and not until this year did the state of Minnesota allow them to write for-profit policies here and enter the market. It's just it doesn't make sense at all. And but fortunately, through the efforts of people like yourself, I would say Free Speech TV, Democracy Now, Facebook, people, really educating themselves. The cat's out of the bag, and they're going to have a really hard time stuffing the cat back in the bag, and they will do anything they can, because when Obama was, wanting to have a public option, that was taken off the table almost immediately, because I heard something along the lines of $10 million a day. That's what I think it was just the insurance companies were spending. That didn't include anybody else. But, we have organizations, healthcare organizations that I've worked for, where, only maybe a third, if even that many, actually do anything for patient care. You have the support services, they allow us to do what we do, but there's all kinds of people making, literally millions of dollars, executives, administrators, you name it. And, in, say, like a city of Vancouver, they have one administrator. We have one for every organization, making probably far more than what they're making there. It's just, and, basic results, healthcare, I think that Canada does an excellent job. And, I've worked in healthcare here on a border state for 26 years, and I've yet to take care of, and I've taken care of literally thousands of patients. So, well, maybe not thousands, but, close to. And I've never taken care of one patient who said, oh, I'm here from Canada to get better care because I couldn't get it up there.
Right. Yeah. And I'm sure your experience is not unique. That's, we lived in Vermont, New Hampshire for 15, 20 years. Never saw a Canadian looking for health care. John, thank you for the call. We'll be back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Okay, so I want to widen the lens a little bit before I pick up your calls, and I see the board is almost completely full here, but and I want to get to your calls, but I want to just widen this conversation a little bit first. We're talking about Howard Schultz, a guy who is a billionaire who could fund his own campaign, and the Supreme Court has ruled that if somebody funds their own campaign, they can put unlimited amounts of money into it. So this guy could, if he chose to, he could divert a couple $100 million. You know, Ross Perot did this back in 1992 and took 20% of the vote. Now, there are some who think that Ross Perot made Bill Clinton president. There are others who think that Ross Perot, had he not been in the race, Bill Clinton would have won even bigger. I mean, it's hard to know because Ross Perot was a single-issue candidate, and both Bush and Clinton were in favor of NAFTA. And, of course, Ross Perot was all about no NAFTA. So what would Howard Schultz be all about? We don't know. Certainly not health care for all. What would Michael Bloomberg, another billionaire who wants to run for president, be all about? Probably not health care for all. So in addition to this, now, this is like the conundrum, right? If you are running for president as a Democrat, or if you're supporting somebody who's running for president as a Democrat, the time is going to come when some really hard decisions have to be made. You've got the Koch brothers pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into the political system. You've got the polluting industries, the Exxon Mobils of the world, the Koch Industries of the world, pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into election campaigns. You've got the NRA funneling money from Russia into campaigns. It's just like there's all these sources of right-wing money. The gun industry, the coal industry, the fossil fuel industry, all these sources of right-wing money. And on the left, you've pretty much got the banksters. They're, pretty much the largest industry in America who's still supporting Democrats occasionally. And so this fascinating piece over at Politico today, Wall Street freaks out about 2020 is the headline. Top Wall Street executives would love to be rid of President Trump, but they're panicked about the prospect of an ultra-liberal Democrat who might raise taxes and slap regulations on them. They are pining for a centrist nominee like Michael Bloomberg. Bloomberg isn't a centrist. If he's not supportive of free college education and health care for all, those are the centrist positions. Those are the middle America positions. If he's not supporting those, he's a radical right-wing Democrat. One CEO says, I'm socially liberal, fiscally conservative. I'd love to vote for a rational Democrat. Executives on Wall Street love Trump's tax cuts and soft-touch regulatory. So far, the Democratic candidates who've met with Wall Street banksters, Joe Biden, Cory Booker, Kirsten Gillibrand, and Kamala Harris, and John Hickenlooper and Beto O'Rourke. The bankers' biggest fear, the nomination goes to an anti-Wall Street crusader like Elizabeth Warren. It can't be Warren. It can't be Sanders, said the CEO of another giant bank. It has to be someone who's centrist. Robert Wolf, an investment banker and fundraiser for Obama, echoed that sentiment. Booker, Harris, and Gillibrand have all taken meetings or made calls to top Democrats on Wall Street gauging potential financial support. But news of these reports draws swift media backlash. So what do you do? I mean, if you're going to need the support of the banksters to run for president, do you take their money and then turn on them? Do you not take their money and be pure? I'm inclined to think that you can actually run for president and not take their money. I may be wrong, I may be naive, but I think it's still possible. Anyhow, we'll pick up your phone calls on all this right after the break. It's 27 and a half minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be right back with your calls. It's coming up on the break here. The Thom Hartmann Program, talk media for the sane, still among us, and we're still here. We're reading today from William Scherer's classic History of the Third Reich, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. This is from Chapter 7, page 188, The Nazification of Germany, 1933 to 34. The theory which Hitler had evolved in his vagabond days in Vienna and never forgotten, that the way to power for a revolutionary movement was to ally itself with some of the powerful institutions in the state, had now worked out in practice pretty much as he had calculated. The president, backed by the army and the conservatives, had made him chancellor. His political power, though great, was, however, not complete. It was shared with these three sources of authority which had put him into office and which were outside and to some extent distrustful of the National Socialist movement. Hitler's immediate task, therefore, was to quickly eliminate them from the driver's seat, make his party the exclusive master of the state, and then with the power of an authoritarian government and its police, carry out the Nazi revolution. He had been in office scarcely 24 hours when he made his first decisive move, springing a trap on his gullible conservative captors and setting in motion a chain of events which he either originated or controlled, and which at the end of just 6 months would bring the complete Nazification of Germany and his own elevation to dictator of the Reich, unified and defederalized for the first time in German history. 5 hours after being sworn in at 5 p.m. on January 3rd, 1933, Hitler held his first cabinet meeting. The minutes of the session, which turned up at Nuremberg among the hundreds of tons of captured secret documents, reveal how quickly and adroitly Hitler, aided by the crafty Goering, began to take his conservative colleagues for a ride. Hindenburg had named Hitler to head not a presidential cabinet, but one based on a majority of the Reichstag, the parliament. However, the Nazis and the Nationalists, the only two parties represented in the government, had only 247 seats out of 538 in parliament and thus lacked a majority. To attain it, they needed the backing of the Center Party with its 70 seats. In the very first hours of the new government, Hitler had dispatched Goering to talk with the centrist leaders, and now he reported to the cabinet that the center was demanding certain concessions. Goering had therefore proposed that the Reichstag be dissolved and new elections held, and Hitler agreed. Hugenberg, a man of wooden mind for all his success in business, objected to taking the center into the government, but on the other hand opposed new elections, well knowing that the Nazis, with the resources of the state behind them, might win an absolute majority at the polls and thus be in a position to dispense with his own services and those of his conservative friends. So he proposed simply suppressing the Communist Party. With its 100 seats eliminated, the Nazis and the Nationalists would have a majority. But Hitler would not go so far at that moment, and it was finally agreed that the Chancellor himself would confer with the Center Party leaders on the following morning, and that if the talks were fruitless, the cabinet would then ask for new elections. Hitler easily made the talks fruitless. At his request, the Center leader, Monsignor Kaas, submitted as a basis for discussion a list of questions which added up to a demand that Hitler promised to govern constitutionally. But Hitler, tricking both Kaas and his cabinet members, reported to the latter that the center had made impossible demands and that there was no chance of agreement. He therefore proposed that the president be asked to dissolve the Reichstag and call new elections. Hugenberg and Papen were trapped. After a solemn assurance that from the Nazi leader that the cabinet would remain unchanged, however, the elections turned out, they agreed to go along with him. New elections were set for March 5th. For the first time in the last relatively free election Germany was to have, the Nazi Party would now employ all the vast resources of the government to win votes. Goebbels was jubilant. Now it will be easy, he wrote in his diary on February 3rd, to carry on the fight, for we can call on all the resources of the state. Radio and press are at our disposal. We shall stage a masterpiece of propaganda, and this time, naturally, there is no lack of money. The big businessmen, pleased with the new government that was going to put the organized workers in their place and leave management to run its business as it wished, were asked to cough up. This they agreed to do at a meeting on February 20th at Goering's Reichstag President's Palace, at which Dr. Schott acted as host, and Goering and Hitler laid down the line to a couple of dozen of Germany's leading magnates, including Krupp, von Bohlen, who had become an enthusiastic Nazi overnight, Bosch and Schnitzler of IG Farben, and Vogler, head of the United Steelworks. The record of this secret meeting has been preserved. Hitler began a long speech with a sop to the industrialists. Private enterprise, he said, cannot be maintained in an age of democracy. It is conceivable only if the people have a sound idea of authority and personality. All the worldly goods we possess we owe to the struggle of the chosen. We must not forget that all the benefits of culture must be introduced more or less with an iron fist. He promised the businessmen that he would eliminate the Marxist and restore the Wehrmacht, the German army, which was of special interest to such industries as Krupp, United Steel, and IG Farben, which stood to gain the most from the rearmament. Now we stand before the last election, Hitler concluded, and he promised his listeners that regardless of the outcome, there will be no retreat. If he did not win, he would stay in power, quote, by other means with other weapons, end quote. Gehring, talking more to the immediate point, stressed the necessity of financial sacrifices, which surely would be much easier for industry to bear if it realized that the election of March the 5th will surely be the last one for the next 10 years, probably even for the next 100 years. All this was made clear to the assembled industrialists, and they responded with enthusiasm to the promise of the end of the infernal elections, the end of democracy, the end of disarmament. The book, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by William Shearer.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Daniel in Manchester, New Hampshire. Hey, Daniel, what's on your mind today?
I was actually thinking about your topic about the Starbucks CEO this morning.
Right.
As I heard MSNBC talking about how he's going to throw a wrench in the probably Kamala candidacy, and I just wonder, why is it, 2 years out, we're already discrediting a guy?
Because he's not a Democrat. He says he's going to run as a third-party candidate. Going into this primary, Daniel, and you raise actually a very important point, and I think it's one that we need to all address. It's going to be my intention going forward to present reasons to vote for as many Democratic candidates as possible. I don't intend to focus on why not to vote for them. And that was my point when I pointed out that you've got 3 or 4 Democratic candidates who have a close relationship to Wall Street. I don't think that necessarily discredits or diminishes their appeal for the Democratic Party. I would like to see somebody who's actually a progressive become our candidate. I think that a progressive, a real progressive, has a much better chance of winning than a so-called centrist, somebody who doesn't want health care for all, somebody who doesn't want education for all, and somebody who doesn't think that the rich should be taxed. But, I'll take it. I would take Bill Clinton again, as much as he was like a moderate Republican, really, today. But
yeah, it seems to me that we're making the same mistakes we did in 2016, and we're starting early.
What was that mistake?
And letting the DNC go ahead and choose a candidate for us and expecting us.
Oh, I'm not seeing that happen, Daniel. And in fact, the fact that Tom Perez and the DNC have put together this thing where you won't even get into the debates unless you can prove that you've got a certain minimum threshold of and a fairly substantial one of small donors. In other words, if you come in with your $1 billion and you give yourself $100 million and you run a bunch of TV ads and you can show you've got this incredible national profile, but you don't have a base of small donors, we're not even going to let you in the debates. So, Daniel, I'm not so concerned about that. I am concerned, though, about a guy who's basically Republican light claiming that he's going to run as a Democrat. Matt in Napa, California. Hey, Matt, what's up?
Hey, Tom, just on the subject of third-party candidacies and whether we need one or not, my perspective is that we certainly do need a challenge to the Democrats based on the rhetoric we've heard over the last 2 to 3 years since Trump's been in office. The main focus is sort of anti-Trump. We've seemed to have completely lost any focus on really going after the 1% in any meaningful way. The Democrats have co-opted over to at least as aggressive foreign policy against Russia as the Republicans. And whether that third-party candidacy should try and combine forces from both conservative and liberal elements would be great, because then we could avoid all this bickering that, we're costing either of those parties the election.
Well, third-party candidacies, when they're done to make a point, can be done in a way that is not destructive. The only time I've seen this in my own lifetime, but I thought it was pretty cool, was when David Cobb in 2004, I think, maybe 2008, David Cobb was running as the Green Party's nominee for president. And unlike Ralph Nader and unlike Jill Stein, David Cobb explicitly said to people, if you live in a purple state, where I might be the guy who, if you vote for the Green Party, it might cost the Democrats an election. If you live in one of those states, A, I'm not going to come campaign in your state, and B, don't vote for me. Vote for the Democrat, please. But if you live in a red state, or a solidly red state, or you live in a solidly blue state, voting for me is a way of telling the Democratic Party that you want them to be more progressive. You want them to be more like the Green Party. And that was such a rational thing, and I really salute David Cobb for that. But I don't see Howard Schultz even thinking like that because he's not a progressive. He's not concerned about the impact he's going to have on progressives. And that's why I think it's so dangerous. Matt, thanks for the call. Thanks for listening to AM 910 there. Mike listening to KPFK in Lomita, California. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Hi, I saw the interview last night on 60 Minutes, and struck me that Mr. Schultz reminded me a lot of Sergeant Schultz from the old Hogan's Heroes program. It is to say he sees nothing, he hears nothing. When you come on with your big issue being the national debt, and you don't say anything about what ballooned it, and when you talk about health care and say that we can't afford it, in spite of all the evidence to the contrary, something tells me either you know nothing about public policy or that you're lying.
Yeah, brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I mean, the reality is, yes, we have a $21 trillion national debt, and virtually all of it came about because of Ronald Reagan's tax cuts, George W. Bush's tax cuts, and Donald Trump's tax cuts. If you took those three presidents' tax cuts out of the equation, the United States would probably have a $10 or $20 billion surplus.
I think
$1 trillion. Yeah, $1 billion.
He wants to be Trump the second.
Yeah, $100 or $200 billion surplus. Yeah, I mean, or a multi-trillion-dollar surplus. In fact. Yep, I agree. Mike, thanks a lot for the call. Corky in Rochester, New York. Hey, Corky, what's up?
Well, I know a lot of politicians listen to your show, and I can prove it to you. I'm proposing a tax on speculation, gambling.
You're talking about Bernie Sanders' Robin Hood tax, the tax, what used to be called the STET tax, the Securities Transaction Excise tax, a tiny, tiny tax on every stock exchange?
Yes, 0.6%.
Right.
That's 0.6 of 1 penny for every dollar invested.
Right.
Now, also, I'm proposing that tax cut anybody who's contributing to a campaign over the allotted amount, the $2,000, contribution.
Right.
You put a 0.6% over to $2,500 on everything. You will pay off all the colleges. You will pay off the medical insurance, and you'll have enough to put a down payment on the debt.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Corky. And Bernie and his people have done the math on this, and it's not rocket science. And the fact that Howard Schultz doesn't know this is shocking to me, frankly. And although the fact that he's being advised by Steve Schmidt, the guy who ran, John McCain's campaign, Republican John McCain's campaign, should probably inform us a lot about, where Schultz is at and what his politics are. Wayne in Chicago, listening on Chicago's Progressive Talk. Hey, Wayne, what's up?
Hey, how you doing, Tom?
Good. You need to get closer to the microphone, though, Wayne. It's hard to hear you.
Okay, hold on 1 second. Let me see. Yeah, here we go. How about now?
That's much better. What's up?
Yeah, Tom, while everybody's been concentrating on this shutdown, the Democrats have been behind doors in secret changing John Conyers' original Medicare for All bill, which was, H.R. 676.
Right.
That has been the gold standard by which Democrats have been finding out if somebody is really for Medicare for All or not.
Well, yes and no. It had some idiosyncrasies that were put in there back long before Obamacare came along, and so if they're tweaking, I get what you're saying, Wayne. If they're tweaking 676 in a way that's making it more progressive and more functional, and that integrates or follows on or recognizes those parts of Obamacare that have already addressed issues that were originally in 676, or have eliminated some of the issues in 676, then that's a good thing. If, on the other hand, they're sitting around saying, how can we greater involve, how can we turn 676, John Conyers' Medicare for All bill, how can we turn that into some variation on Obamacare where, United Healthcare and Aetna and all these, Blue Cross can still make hundreds of millions or billions of dollars every year. If that's what they're doing, then we've got a problem. Is that what you're suggesting, Wayne?
That's exactly what I'm suggesting. The word is they're trying to water that bill down.
Yeah.
This is what I want to say, Tom. You concentrate a lot on what the Republicans are doing wrong, but you got to concentrate on your own house first. Just like those 12 United States senators that voted against getting cheaper pharmaceutical drugs from Canada. Right. We would have them now if it wasn't for the Democrats. So you got to focus on your own house before you even talk about Republicans. Why not focus on your own house and what those people are not doing right first?
I think we can do both, Wayne, and I'm perfectly willing to do both. And this is, and what you're describing, by the way, is the problem of big money in politics. I guarantee you that those Democrats would not have voted to forbid the importation of foreign drugs if they hadn't taken money from the pharmaceutical industry. I guarantee you. Wayne, thanks for the call. Morris in Long Beach, California, listening on KPFK in Los Angeles. Hey, Morris, what's on your mind today?
Okay, we're in trouble with Kamala. Let's make a deal. Harris is our best Democratic candidate. When she was the Attorney General here in the state of California, she took $6.5 million from a guy named Angelo Bazzillo, who was head of a mortgage company called Countrywide. Her staff was shocked. This guy should have been put in jail. 20% of all of your foreclosures that took place in this country were in the state of California. People in California should have gotten free homes. Why are you saying that? People were getting free homes back east. Why were they getting free homes? Because the people who are foreclosing on you, if they cannot prove that they're the beneficiary, that they own that loan, they don't have a right to foreclose on you. How come? What happened here? There's a thing called MIRS, Mortgage Electronic Reporting Services. They were supposed to track who owns the loans on all these, the notes on all these loans that they made. Something like 60 million loans. It cost the county recorder $1 billion. What happens when you own a house? You got a grand deed that shows who owns the house. Now, the deed of trust might change hands 5 to 30 times during the life of that loan. That's a lot of money that's paid to the county recorder for the recording. Right on. Now, when Kamala Harris was the Attorney General, she didn't do anything to protect the public, but she sure did do a whole lot to protect business. And I want to say this about her: she is one of the sharpest minds in this country, Professor, but she's weak on cognitive sensibilities.
Yeah,
thank you.
I get it. Morris, Countrywide too was the company that Steve Mnuchin bought up, and then became the foreclosure king. Right? He's known as the foreclosure king for how he threw so many Californians in particular out of their houses, which might be why Donald Trump thinks he's so wonderful to make him the Treasury Secretary. Morris, the one thing that I get that, and I know that and some of the criminal justice stuff in Kamala Harris's past is problematic. She is A, disavowing a lot of that. B, the hope, the thing that I keep reminding myself of is that one of the most corrupt politicians in machine politics, in democratic machine, the old Figueroa LaGuardia stuff in New York politics in the 1930s, one of the most corrupt politicians out of that. He was being sued for bribing a federal judge, or for a state judge, rather. One of those most corrupt Democratic politicians in New York State was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And he became president and looked around and said, okay, I know how to get things done. I know who the big players are, and I'm going to change my policies. And I because the times changed. And I think the times right now are a whole lot different than they were a decade ago or a half a decade ago when Kamala Harris was doing that stuff. And I think that it's possible for her to change. And these are the conversations that you need to have if you want her to change those positions.
Let me tell you what we are today. We are a race-conscious country. We need someone that can speak to that. Kamala Harris can't do that.
Why not?
She just can't.
Why not?
Because she's not. I don't believe that she can. She can't speak for people, Professor, that have been, trampled on. She's not white, and that's important right now.
No, I don't think.
I'm sorry to tell you,
Morris, you don't need white people to talk about. Ultimately, white people are the ones who need to be convinced and changed and all that kind of stuff. But white people talking about race as presidential candidates, I think having a person who has the experience. Kamala Harris certainly has a multiracial experience. She understands race in America simply because of the way she grew up, and in my mind, she gets a lot of points for that. Morris, thanks for the call. We'll see where this goes. But I really think it's time to set down the circular firing squad.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Instead of coming up with all the reasons why we shouldn't vote for any of our good Democratic candidates, let's start looking at why we should. It's 48 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Michael, watching Free Speech TV in Denver, Colorado. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Good morning, Tom. Hi. I just wanted to make a couple of comments here about our healthcare system as opposed to a socialized or some kind of form of socialized medicine. Years and years ago, back in the 70s and 80s, I was a federal government employee. I'm not going to go into it. I was military, but just in general, I was in Europe, and I was doing some work over there because of the training that I'd gotten, and I was linked to a unit from the Royal Norwegian Navy. Spent time in Norway. They have a socialized medical and educational system there. I went through a few episodes, actually, and one also in Italy, and I wouldn't call them, at the top of the rock in terms of socialized medicine. But, Tom, I was taken care of extremely well, extremely well. We have the technology and these mega hospitals and all that. You don't see that in Norway, generally speaking. In terms of hygiene, I could not believe how well ordered and clean their hospitals and their clinics were. Their employees, the first and foremost thing was to take care of the patient and have compassion. They had traveling doctors and nurses. We have traveling nurses here, but we really don't have traveling doctors anymore.
Yep.
And I didn't pay 1 cent. And in Italy, when I went to get pain medication for an abscess tooth that they extracted, cost me nothing to have it extracted. Cost me $1.37 American money to buy the painkiller through the established clinical pharmacy that they had attached to the hospital. That
Amazing.
I went.
So in Italy, they even have free dental.
And this was in the 70s, so I didn't know anything about this. They just said, "Don't worry about it. That's fine. Go home with your medication."
Yeah, we had that experience in Germany. I mean, we lived in Germany from '86 to '87, and for a year, the summer of each year. And one of our kids, we took him to the doctor, and after it was all done, I was like, "What do I owe you?" And she's like, "We don't even have a cash register here. We're not capable. We don't have any billing capacity at all. You don't owe us anything."
Right. And Tom, last thing, in general, I had people cynically say, "Well, how many people live in Norway and Sweden and Italy? Look at us. We're a mega gigantic country." And stuff. I remind them that I don't believe that communism ever existed on this planet, but they want to call it a communist system in Red China. They get better health care in Red China there at their public clinics, I'm sure, than we have here. And I've not been to China. I've had people that have traveled there and say, no, it's really not as bad as we would want to make it. So, not to defend the Red Chinese or anything, but that's all I want to say, and keep hammering that. And I wish we would look at the Scandinavian model and the more progressive European models to say, this is the way we should be going. So thanks very much for everything you do, Tom. I really enjoy it.
Thank you, Michael, and thanks for sharing your story, your perspective. I think those kind of stories have a lot more credibility when somebody can say, this was my experience. Michael, thank you very much for the call. And thanks for watching Free Speech TV. 51 and a half minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. We'll be right back with more of your calls in just a moment. Welcome back. 52 minutes past the hour. Marta in Big Bear Lake, California. Hey, Marta, what's on your mind?
Well, I voted for Ross Perot. I volunteered for Ross Perot, Ralph Nader, Bernie Sanders, who, ran sort of an outside, almost third-party campaign. People vote mainly, I think, on personal experience. And for a lot of people, Bill Clinton, did help, but for me, I got wiped out. I was almost homeless because of the SNL crisis. And
back in the 80s.
Ross Perot, I think it was about 1990 that it hit the developers, construction developers, and I was almost homeless. Ross Perot was talking about corporate lobbyists running the halls of Congress, and also about NAFTA. And I related my personal experience. I worked so hard. And then, of course, Bill Clinton passed NAFTA and the WTO. And, things really didn't get better. And then, I went back to college. I became a teacher. And, once again, we're still seeing the corporate lobbyists. I think Al Gore ran a horrible campaign. Ralph Nader was talking about the things that were super important.
But Marta, if I can interrupt for just a second, because we just have a minute here until we're going to hit the end of the hour. Ralph Nader did not substantially change the dialogue in the Democratic Party. Ross Perot didn't substantially change the dialogue in the Democratic Party. Certainly Joel Stein didn't substantially change the dialogue in the Democratic Party, but Bernie Sanders did. And I think the reason why he was so successful, is because he ran in the Democratic primary. And that's why Howard Schultz running as an independent, to me, means, let's completely ignore the guy. Just don't, not ignore as don't talk about him, but let's not give him money, let's not vote for him, because these third-party candidates don't change our party, whereas people running in the primary do. So shouldn't we be encouraging genuine progressives in the primary, Marta?
Well, I think, the candidate should be meeting the needs of the people. We look at progressive issues that have 70% approval, and yet what I'm seeing, to tell you the truth, is, the ads from Kamala Harris. She's backing away from Medicare for All. So I think that, that for people do vote mainly on personal experience. I am extremely concerned about catastrophic global warming, and I don't believe that. I just personally, and I think a lot of people don't believe that Kamala or Cory or Joe Biden will make this the number one priority, along with single payer. I'm looking at being wiped out. I lost a home to Countrywide. They took my mother's home. I didn't believe that and I actually did vote for Barack Obama, and then I felt that he didn't do anything to help me or other people I knew that lost their homes to these giant banks. So I think that I would love to see a candidate, I believe, that really, really speaks the truth. So yeah. I believe in the carrot and the stick. If they don't follow through, then, they're not going to get the votes.
Marta, thank you. I got it. Alan in Springdale, Utah. Hey, Alan, what's up? Excuse me, Alan. What's up?
Hi, Tom. I just want to agree with you, if I understand what you said rightly. I would like to see, 5 parties and ranked choice voting and all that, but we're not going to get that anytime soon.
Right.
I think the Democratic Party is kind of the only game in town, unless you get someone like Ross Perot, who was really weird. And
well, Howard Schultz has the potential to be that person. Yeah, but I don't want anybody messing in the left half of the political spectrum this year. Next year. I think it's just too important.
Absolutely. And let me tell you, I think a lot of people vote in a much different way. They assess candidates much differently than most of the callers of the show do. A friend of mine in Tennessee, he's for health care for everybody. He's anti-war, all that stuff. But he voted for Trump because he didn't like Hillary and he thought Trump would shake things up.
Right.
It's just not... This guy is not a dumb guy, but he's just totally politically...
No, I know people who believed Trump lies and voted for him. They thought he was going to bring home the jobs. They thought he cared about the country. They thought he was going to raise taxes on billionaires and lower taxes on working people. Trump lied through his teeth on all those things and many, many more. He thought that Trump was going to give us all health care that would be better than Obamacare and cheaper. Trump simply lied. He's spot on. Alan, thank you for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
So would you like to watch the Thom Hartmann program? All 3 hours of our program, anytime you'd like? It's available. Would you like to hear special content where we talk about, what the billionaires are up to, or climate change, or the newest things in science? There's all kinds of great content like that. That's also available. The place to find all this is the Thom Hartmann channel over on Patreon. Patreon.com, Patreon.com. /Thom Hartmann, ThomHartmann, all run together. Patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. And there, when you become a supporter of the program through Patreon, you have access to the full 3-hour show every day, anytime you want, any place you want, and special content that we put up every single week that is unique specifically to our Patreon page. So check it out. Our book for the Thom Hartmann Book Club today is A Nation Forged by Crisis, A New American History by Jay Sexton. And I'm reading from the introduction. This is page 9. The quest for national security and global power, America's shifting position in the international economy, and fluctuations in immigration have made the United States the nation that it is today. Americans' foreign relations have been conditioned its history not only in their cumulative effects over the long haul, but also as a result of their volatility. In periods of crisis, America's position in the world has lurched in unexpected directions. For as inexorable as the rise of the United States appears in retrospect, there have been contingent moments in which the very existence of our nation was up for grabs. This is the essence of crisis. The world turned upside down, the known replaced by the unknown, panic reigning as people struggle to maintain their balance and shifts in the very ground beneath their feet. It came with a speed and ferocity that left men dazed, New York Times correspondent Elliot Bell wrote of Wall Street's catastrophic collapse in October of 1929. Quote, the market seemed like an insensate thing that was wreaking a wild and pitiless revenge upon those who thought to master it, end quote. Crises are contagious, spreading like viruses from one realm to another. It's not without reason that the word crisis was associated with medical conditions and health scares in the 19th century. Each of the periods under consideration in this book were less a singular crisis than a set of interlinked crises. A political crisis could trigger an economic panic, which in turn could intensify social conflict, and so on. As these pandemics spread through the body politic, crisis itself was normalized, becoming an almost accepted characteristic of an age. Just as foreign crises have spread to the United States, domestic ones have spilled across its borders, unsettling foreign countries and peoples, as well as reconfiguring America's connections to the world. Consider the fateful winter of secession that followed the 1860 election of Abraham Lincoln. The crisis over slavery that divided the Union into warring sections that led to a series of sharp reversals in America's position in the global system. The foreign capital that had rushed into the roaring American economy in the preceding decades suddenly began to flee. Indeed, more capital left the United States in 1860 to 1862 than came into it. Also a once-in-a-century occurrence. One of the world's most valuable commodities and America's largest exports, Southern cotton, was confined to the ports of the Confederacy as a result of Richmond's ill-fated diplomatic strategy, leading to unemployment and social unrest in the British textile town of Lancashire. The most unexpected reversal was how the national security that the United States had attained after the war against Mexico in the 1840s was suddenly imperiled, with European powers encroaching once again upon the Western Hemisphere. Meanwhile, the Confederate emissaries across the Atlantic were in search of alliance with Britain. Our country, Secretary of State William Seward lamented in early 1861, after having expelled all European powers from the continent, now threatened to relapse into an aggravated form of its colonial experience, and like India, Turkey, China, and Italy, become the theater of transatlantic intervention and rapacity. A wider view of American history that looks beyond the nation's borders brings into focus not only the migration patterns, economic flows, and international rivalries that have connected the United States to the world, but also those rare moments in which the very existence of the nation was in question. Perhaps none was more pregnant with implications than the autumn of 1877, when the fate of the Patriots' bid for independence hung in the balance. Having proclaimed their independence to the world the previous 4th of July, their cause had stalled on the battlefield and in the diplomatic courts of the old world. I think the game is pretty near up, Washington privately confessed at year's end. To accomplish their independence is not quite so easy as to declare it, the British philosopher Jeremy Bentham haughtily remarked. But then a series of events forever changed the course of modern history. The stunning Patriot victory at the Battle of Saratoga in October, the drafting of the Articles of Confederation in November that, for all its limitations, further demonstrated the political resolve of the Americans. And most of all, the alliance signed with France in February 1778, which provided the Patriots with the resources, military assistance, and naval power that ultimately tipped the scales in their favor. There are comparable Saratoga moments in other crises in U.S. history, as we shall see. These contingent moments played out in their own distinctive ways, but are joined by a common denominator that has been curiously forgotten in our age of U.S. global power. Foreign states and people have played decisive roles in the critical moments of American history. As we make our way through our own era of global instability, in an unprecedentedly interconnected world, there's perhaps no more important lesson from the past to keep in mind. Crisis may beget crisis, Franklin Roosevelt said, as his administration transitioned from battling the Great Depression to entering the Second World War. But the progress underneath does not wholly halt. It does go forward, end quote. Like so many of Roosevelt's public statements, this one reveals a truth even as it conceals others. The United States came out on the other side of its greatest crises as a stronger and more efficiently organized nation, as Roosevelt suggested. The process of mobilizing resources to counter threats catalyzed innovations in political economy, such as the creation of a national financial system during the Civil War, and the economic reforms of the New Deal. The book is A Nation Forged by Crisis by Jay Sexton.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and on the line with us is Congressman Ro Khanna. Congressman Khanna represents the state of California's 17th District. As a Democrat, he's the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. His website, Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov, and you can tweet him at Rep. Ro, R-O, Khanna. Congressman Khanna, welcome back to the program.
Great to be back on.
Thank you. And I should note, you're with us for the whole hour. You're taking calls from our listeners. And if anybody wants to talk to Congressman Khanna, the number is 202-808-9925. Big picture here. Where are we at in this country? What's on your plate right now? What do you want our listeners and viewers to know about?
Well, it was a torturous 35 days and just such a self-inflicted wound for so many federal workers, not just in my district, but actually when you're in Washington, D.C., you meet a lot of folks who work for the federal government and who were falling behind rent or couldn't make payments. So it really was a terrible moment for the country. And, of course, 1 million contractors are not going to get paid who are furloughed because only the employees get paid. So I think there's several things going forward. First, we need to all be united that we're not going to give a dollar for the border wall. I think Nancy has made that very clear. There were cracks. Whenever there were any cracks in our caucus, she quickly got us to be unified. With February 15th coming up, we need to be unified that we're not going to compromise on that. The second, if the president declares an emergency, we need to hold the Republicans who have criticized that idea to account. I saw Rubio and Roy Blunt going on television saying it would be a terrible idea for him to declare a national emergency. Well, Section 5 of the National Emergency Act allows Congress to overturn a presidential emergency by a joint resolution. We would need veto-proof majorities, but there are enough Republicans who are telling him that that would be a mistake, that I hope we can do that if it comes down to that. And then we need to get our positive agenda to start working on Medicare for All. I'm on the Budget Committee where we're going to have hearings on that, start working on Green New Deal and legislation on climate change, on a $15 minimum wage, and prescription drug reform, and all the things that we've promised the American people.
That's a lot of stuff. So let's dig into our phone calls and see what people. And if you're on hold left over from the previous hour, if you don't have a question for Congressman Khanna specifically, drop off the call and call us back in the next hour. But I'm assuming that Shira has gone through and made sure that everybody has a question for you. Joe in Cupertino, California, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Good morning, Congressman. Thank you for returning to our little bird here at the district. I thought your response to this wall supporter lady was really respectful, and I commend you for your upbringing in Pennsylvania. I'm a native Californian, and I don't see an American without Hispanics. Migrants, farm workers have made California great alongside with many immigrants. Tom Brokaw's comments on Sunday regarding brown babies is very sad. What can Democrats do to stop the Trump administration from enforcing this unfair H-1B visa, H-4 visa, and prevent this from ruining the country? I'll take your comments off the air.
I appreciate the call, and certainly as the son of immigrants, I very much believe that immigrants have contributed an enormous amount economically to the country. They tend to be more law-abiding in terms of the statistics and commit less crime than those born here, and that's probably because they come here and understand what a country of opportunity this is. On the H-1B visa issue, look, there has been abuse on the H-1B visa, and I've said we need to reform some of that. You don't want people coming here making $60,000 if the market is $100,000. And the way to fix that is to expedite the process of a green card so that people aren't being taken advantage of by multinational corporations in having lower wage pressures. And I was on a bill with Senator Durbin and Bill Pascrell to try to reform the H-1B visa. But what the Trump administration is doing, which is not allowing spouses of people on H-1B visas to work, is just cruel. I mean, that leads to increasing the incentive for domestic violence. A lot of women who are the folks who are married to H-1B visa holders and don't have economic independence if they can't work. And so I have strongly resisted their effort to deny H-1B visa holders' spouse the ability to work.
Okay. Carolyn in Fremont, California. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi. Just took you off speaker. Hello, Professor. Hello, my congressman.
Thank you.
Hello. How are you?
Well, I am recovering from, southern part of southern Alameda County. You got us. I am recovering from total knee replacement surgery, which I had last week. And my 23-year-old son took me to Kaiser to have the surgery and everything. And I'm on Medicare. And he was very concerned, are we going to have enough money to pay for this and whatnot? And I told him the surgery was $250, and, we have to pay $36 for some medication. And he thinks that's a great plan. So you got, one voter who's really hoping for total Medicare for all.
Well, I appreciate the call. I hope the knee surgery recovery goes well. My father had knee surgery, and it took him about 6 months, but now he's doing great. And I think your example is a good one. Most people who are on Medicare are very happy with Medicare, and there's no reason that we can't give that kind of care to every American citizen. And actually, it would be cheaper. It would be cheaper for people because they would be paying some fee as opposed to the exorbitant premiums that they're paying to insurance companies, and there wouldn't be the same out-of-pocket costs or deductibles. And it would be cheaper for the country because you would be saving all of the profits that are currently going to private insurance, that are currently going to monopolistic hospitals, that are currently going to pharmaceuticals. And so you're actually saving the country a tremendous amount of money. I am absolutely committed to Medicare for all, and for the first time in 20 years, we're going to have hearings on this in our budget committee, on which I'm serving, and I will keep you posted on those hearings.
Rick in Flint, Texas. You are on the air with Congressman Ro Khanna.
Hello, sirs. A few years back, I was complaining to my doctor about Medicaid doesn't get the best drug prices, and she informed me that they're not allowed to under penalty of law. I was gobsmacked. Why are we not allowed to negotiate for better, lower drug prices? I negotiated for my cable bill and got $10 off a month. And I did the same with my electric bill, and I got the same rate for another year and a half. So why don't we negotiate?
Well, you're hitting the nail on the head on one of the biggest problems in our medical system, and that is that the federal government, Medicare, Medicaid, aren't allowed to negotiate on drug prices. As a result, Americans pay more for drugs than people anywhere in the world. And this is not just what makes drugs unaffordable for people. We all know stories of folks who ration their medicines because they don't want to pay the exorbitant price. But even if you have good health care insurance and you're covered and you're not paying it out of pocket, it's adding an extraordinary amount of cost to the American taxpayer or to businesses that is money they don't have to raise people's wages. So we need to pass a law, which I am a co-sponsor of this bill, and Lloyd Doggett and Elijah Cummings and Bernie Sanders have been introducing it to allow Medicare to negotiate, to have an international reference price so that Americans also aren't paying more than people in France, Germany, Japan, Britain, and Canada.
Yeah, this is. We were doing this show when this law was passed. It was in 2005, as I recall. And Billy Towson, who shepherded, the Republican from Louisiana, who shepherded that piece of legislation through Congress that gave $600 billion profit over the next decade to the drug companies, he got permission from the Speaker of the House to retire early so he could take a job as the head of pharma at $2 million a year. It's amazing, Congressman. It's absolutely. In fact, he came on this program to try to justify it, which was hysterical. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. His website, khanna.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep Ro Khanna. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Gary in Overland Park, Kansas. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, Congressman. I am concerned that I don't hear enough progressive candidates explaining why they are the champions of capitalism, not conservatives, when progressive policies like health care for all and forgiveness of student loans put more money in the pockets of average workers, and those average workers' purchases create jobs, which creates growth with capitalism. I'm not hearing that enough, and it makes sense to say that message because workers have to spend almost every dollar they get to survive, and their spending puts money back in circulation, and their purchases create jobs. But billionaires don't spend their additional dollar of income to the same degree as a worker. The middle class spends far more of each additional dollar of income than billionaires do. I don't hear this message from Democratic candidates enough, and I think they're letting the conservatives seize the high ground when Democrats are actually the true champions of capitalism.
Well, I appreciate very much your perspective, and I call myself a pro-growth progressive. I represent Silicon Valley, a place of extraordinary innovation and entrepreneurship, and yet I have supported policies such as Medicare for all, a $15 minimum wage, having more restrictions on stock buybacks, making sure we have infrastructure funding, making sure we have free tuition for college, all of it, which, because I agree with you, that's what's going to drive economic growth. That is what's going to put more money in the pockets of individuals who will spend it, and we know our economy is consumer demand driven. That's what's going to create the human capital that's going to lead to innovation and job creation, and that's what's going to free our businesses to actually stay in the United States. Healthcare costs are the biggest reason that they often offshore. So I am, in this sense, similar in philosophy to FDR. He said he believes in free enterprise, but not free enterprise for the connected and the privileged, free enterprise that rewards work and ideas. And that's what I think good progressive policy can do, reorient the markets in a way that aren't just rent-seeking, but actually are rewarding the middle class and working class that are often doing a lot of the hard work.
Brilliant. So, Shauna, in Cleveland, Ohio, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna. We have just a minute to the break, so Shauna, so you can make it brief, please.
Okay, very good. Hi, Congressman. I just want to piggyback off of what another caller said in the last segment. His name was Wayne, and he mentioned that there are a group of Democrats who are or have erasing or rewriting policies to the Affordable Care Act that can impact constituents. Can you speak about that, either confirm or deny it? And then are you able to let callers know where constituents can go, what resources we have to stay on top of things that are happening behind the scenes that mainstream media is not covering?
And it was also rewriting 676, Congressman.
Sure.
Thanks,
so in terms of rewriting the single-payer bill, Pramila Jayapal and Mark Pocan have been doing an extraordinary job on that. They're the chairs of our Progressive Caucus, and we're going to be releasing it soon. Here are some of the things it's going to have. It's going to have, finally, long-term care. That's an extraordinarily important issue. Right now, you can go bankrupt, even if you are on Medicare, if you happen to need assisted living.
Congressman, let's pick this up on the other side of the break, okay?
Sure.
Great,
Sounds
thank
great.
you. We'll be right back with Congressman Ro Khanna answering your questions, taking your calls for the hour right here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. Those folks who support our program, who help essentially sponsor us on YouTube and on Patreon, have access to content, special content that is generally not available on YouTube or anyplace else. In exchange for supporting us at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, you get the whole 3-hour show, a video podcast that's not available to the general public, that you can watch anytime you want for every single show every day, plus special content that is not available anywhere else. The rant this week, 200,000 Americans have died from overdoses involving prescription opioids since 1996. So the question, what do we do with a company and the individuals who own that company and run that company that has been directly or indirectly responsible for the deaths of over 100,000 Americans? What do we do? We've got a serious problem with an out-of-control pharmaceutical industry in the United States, and we need and product liability in general. We need to do something about it.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. We're talking with Congressman Ro Khanna of California. He's the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Congressman, you had a call just a minute ago asking what are the changes that are being made to John Conyers' iconic House Resolution 676, the Medicare for All that we've all been pushing for. It seems like 20 years now, and it's being updated to incorporate stuff that it was missing, and also to be reinvented in the context of some of the structures from Obamacare that are out there. You want to give us an update on that?
Absolutely. Well, first, as I mentioned, it's going to have long-term care. Right now, one of the biggest challenges is if you need assisted living, if you need to be in a nursing home, if you need a nurse at home to take care of you, that is not covered. And there are stories after stories of families, often in the middle class, who have even $500,000 of savings, $1 million of savings, and they end up going bankrupt because they can't afford the long-term care. We're going to provide long-term care under the new bill. Second, it's going to cover dental and it's going to cover vision. Right now, that's not clearly covered. Third, it's going to have no copays. A lot of times, one of the biggest challenges is the amount of money because of deductibles or copays that folks have to pay. And finally, it's going to have a quicker transition, not, okay, we're going to have some transition years down the line, but a realistic timetable for how do we transition to Medicare for All. Pramila Jayapal has just done an extraordinary job on this with Mark Pocan, and we will be releasing this probably in the next few weeks, and then soliciting a lot of feedback from people like yourself who've been in this fight and ahead of their times 20 years ago, but also many of your callers, and we'll welcome their feedback. The caller said, how can you do so? People can write to our offices. They can call our offices. If they're coming to Washington, I'd be happy to meet with them, as would Pramila and others working on this.
Great stuff. Robert in Cheney, Washington. Robert, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Good day, gentlemen.
Good day.
I would like to hello. I would like to propose in counter to the MAGA jingoism. How about if it's blue? If they're blue, send them through, or send them through if they're blue, like a blue hat versus a red hat. And I'll leave it at that. You gentlemen have a great day.
Okay. Thank you, Robert.
Well, it's creative. We can use all the jingles and all the slogans. I do think at some point, though, this country is going to care about substance. You know, when you go to a doctor, you want someone competent before they operate on you. When you call an electrician, you care whether they can actually fix the lighting in your house. And at some point, people are going to say, we keep electing these folks, and we're not getting jobs, and we're not getting health care, and we're not getting education. Maybe we ought to elect someone who actually can fix the problems we have.
Yeah. Amen. Paul in Glenside, Pennsylvania. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Tom, thanks for having me on. Hi, Congressman Khanna. I'd like to address the Democratic Party's messaging for Medicare for All. I think it's very important that we have a clear and disciplined message about the financing of Medicare for All. We can't call it something for free. We can't call it something that won't cost you anything. People think that's BS. People know there's no such thing as a free lunch. They know there's no such thing as no cost. That's not really getting the message across, and it might take a little bit more effort, but I think it needs to be emphasized that we're moving the distribution of health care from a money-based market system to a social insurance program on a nationwide level that doesn't require the mechanism of the market. Distribution is typically handled by money at the point of exchange. Well, we don't really exchange anything for health care if we're laying in the middle of the street after we've been hit by a car, or we've been shot, or we've had a heart attack.
So, Paul, reduce that to a bumper sticker.
Medicare for All, backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government.
There you go. Okay, Congressman, your thoughts?
Well, look, I'm sympathetic to your view that we shouldn't be talking about things for free. Obviously, health care costs money, but no one is talking about it for free. Every time the Republicans say that Medicare for All would cost $32 trillion, they don't say the second logical sentence, which is that the current system costs $49 trillion over 10 years. Obviously, it costs money to have doctors and nurses and healthcare equipment. The point is Medicare for All would save $17 trillion, and you want to know how you would pay for it. It's very, very clear. I mean, in Bernie Sanders' plan, you have some premium that is progressive, a fee that people are paying. I think it's 2%. But let's say you're paying 2%, $800 or something a year, $1,000 a year, that's far, far less than the $5,000 a year you're paying to the insurance companies. And then you have progressive taxation for those who are making over $250,000 or over $1 million. And the combination of progressive taxation and the premium would more than sufficient be more than sufficient to pay for Medicare for All, which will be a savings to the country and a savings to individuals. The small premium you're paying will be far less than you pay to insurance companies. I'm sure there are people who can put that in a clearer soundbite, but no one is saying it's going to be free. What we're saying is we're going to get the excessive profits out of the system.
Yeah, and I think as people understand that even, you turn 65, you go on Medicare, you're still paying a fee every month to Medicare for that. And that'll just continue. Congressman Ro Khanna with us.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Congressman Khanna taking your calls for the hour. He's the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, represents the 17th District of California. Ro Khanna, Khanna.house.gov is his website. Rep Ro Khanna is the Twitter handle. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They are about making common cause with the brokenness of being. A brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken, because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Shukatis, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what the we who cohabit in the space of the undercommons want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met, who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and that this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, excuse me. The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, he knows the parameters of the real. He sees what is included and what is left out. And he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moton and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Congressman Ro Khanna, the Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, is on the line with us, taking your calls for the hour. His website, Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. His Twitter handle, Rep Ro Khanna. And Floyd in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. You are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes. I understand that progressive taxation will help the country, but I think in order to really cement things, we need to bring back the progressive inheritance tax. Something about people inheriting a small fortune tends to turn them fascist.
Well, I'm for significantly increasing the estate tax, and I agree with you that there's something people have a problem with on inherited wealth as opposed to having people make money in every new generation, and we should have dramatically higher estate taxes.
Charles in oh no, my call screener just crashed. Do you see any chance that an inheritance tax is going to come along and is going to get rebooted and will have some teeth in the future, Congressman?
I do. I think that it's a place where you can actually get broader support than just progressives. If you say, look, no one is saying that we don't allow people to make money, and that they can even give a reasonable amount to their families and their kids, but you don't have to pass on and bequeath hundreds of millions of dollars that last generations. I mean, that was the idea of feudal estates, and one of the problems with feudalism was money was tied up in a few families' hands, and it wasn't dynamic and it wasn't liquid. It's not good for the market. So I believe there are a lot of economic arguments for taxing inheritance.
Yeah. Congressman, with apologies, my call screen software has completely crashed right across the board. So we're rebooting it right now. If you and I get disconnected, please call right back.
Sure thing.
All of our callers who are on hold are going to get dumped, and they're going to have to call right back in. So if we could take this, it'll take about 3 minutes, I think, for us to reset everything. Take this period of time here to talk about, if you don't mind, the Democratic field. I'm fascinated by this, and I'm curious your thoughts on the folks. I was so happy to hear you say earlier, invoke FDR. We really need another FDR, and I would love to see you running for president, for that matter. But I'm curious your thoughts on the current field that we have. Oh, he hung up? Oh, he's gone. Okay. All right. He's going to have to call right back in, and we'll see where that goes. Interesting. And in the meantime, I've got to figure out a way to. This is we got it. We got him back on. Okay, great. The problem is I don't have. Do you have Neo Screener up, Shira? Okay. I'm trying to bring it up. There we go. Okay. Congressman Khanna, welcome back.
Great to be back.
My apologies. Every now and then, just weird stuff goes on with our computer systems. I do have some of the callers are back, so we can just continue the conversation. We don't need to digress here. Charles in Vancouver, Washington. Charles, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Great. Switching off speaker.
Thank
Morning,
you.
Tom. Congressman, it's a pleasure.
My pleasure.
Do I have you? Hello?
Yeah. I can hear you.
Off speaker. Oh,
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Congressman, as we move forward towards 2020, there are two competing tax proposals. On the one side, we have Senator Kamala Harris and others proposing a wealth tax. On the other side, we have Representative AOC, who is advocating to raise the tax. A wealth tax, on the one hand, while it raises revenue, does nothing to address the elephant in the room, in my view, concentrated wealth, which it seems raising the tax coupled with an enlightened tax code that begins to once again reward corporate behavior in the public good, good compensation, in-house child care, and so forth. It's a difficult question, and Americans need information to understand it, so I look forward to your reply.
And Congressman, if I could add something to Charles's question. It hit me this morning, of all days, as Louise and I were walking into the studio today, we were talking about this, that we already have a wealth tax in the United States. It's called the property tax. And so if you're middle class and your wealth is your, the $100,000 or $200,000 that you've got in equity in your home, you're paying tax on that every year, and a substantial tax. I mean, a really substantial amount of money. Why not simply expand that property tax to include other property that people own, like their stock portfolio or whatever it may be, if it has a value that's over a certain level?
Sure. I mean, I think economically, your logic makes complete sense. What I do point out, let's start with some of the basics, which is if you just repealed the entire Trump tax cut to high earners, and you repealed the Bush tax cuts to high earners, and you stopped some of the endless wars, you would have a tremendous amount of revenue, more revenue than even the wealth tax would generate as Warren has proposed it, because Clinton, even though I didn't agree with his politics, left this country with surpluses. So I am all for looking at taxing corporations overseas. I think we need to look at a wealth tax. But I think as a basic matter in terms of revenue, let's not forget that we've actually gone the other way. We've had massive tax cuts of trillions of dollars that we should start with to build an economic future.
Mark in San Francisco, listening on AM 910. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, Congressman. I'm proposing that we end the taxation on Social Security payments and expand Social Security and go on the offense on Social Security instead of sitting back waiting for the Republicans to cut it.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think at a time of the extraordinary income inequality and people struggling with healthcare costs going up, education costs going up, and home values going up, housing going up, we need to have more Social Security benefits, and you can make Social Security completely solvent. This is a total myth that it's somehow going bankrupt. You can make it completely solvent and expand benefits if you do one simple thing: tax people on income over $250,000 for their payroll tax. Right now, it's capped at $113,000. That would take care of the entire Social Security issue.
Mike in Munster, Indiana. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
I'd like to know, when they figure the price it would cost for a single payer, if they deduct out the amount that your employer pays to match, for your premiums, your employer often matches as half or something. Also, the money they would save not having the HR departments to, manage all that. And money you save, you would no longer have to pay your own premiums. That would free up money to pay for, a single payer system. Is that counted into the plus and minus of what single payer would cost?
And I would add, as an employer, I have to pay for workman's comp. That would no longer be necessary. There's a lot of savings here, Congressman.
You're absolutely right, and this is why it would save over 10 years $17 trillion. And I think we, as progressives, need to make that point again and again, because the Republicans get on television and they say it costs $32 trillion, and they leave out that the current system costs $49 trillion. And you're pointing out just some of the savings to businesses for the part they're paying to private insurance, savings in workman's comp, savings in the HR department, savings because the money is no longer going to pharmaceuticals and for hospital facility fees and for insurance advertising. So this is something that is not just going to be more moral and covering more people. It's actually going to be economically much better. I mean, if you look at it very simply, we put 18% of our GDP on healthcare. China puts about 5% of their GDP. Most European countries are around 9 or 10%. it's a huge competitive disadvantage for the United States businesses to be having that much of a cost in health care.
Amen. Robert in Glenview, Illinois. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Good afternoon. My question is about messaging about the wall. I'm a diehard Democrat. I listen to all the stations, radio, TV. All I hear on the Republican side is, I want $5.7 billion for my wall, or I'm shutting it down. And all I hear on the Democratic side, and I know it's not true, but that's all you hear is, we're not giving you any money for the wall. I'd like to hear on the Democratic side, we'll give you $10 billion for border security, and this is what we'll spend it on. We'll spend it on border guards, dogs, electronic surveillance, and I know they're in favor of that, but you don't hear it, because all they keep saying is, well, we're not giving you a penny for the wall. And I'd like to see them propose a bill every day for the 15 days, send it to the Senate, pass it in the House, send it to the Senate, and have the Senate turn it down. And so at the end of 15 days, instead of Trump saying, I want my $5.7 billion, the Democrats can say, well, we gave you $10 billion, and this is what we gave it to you for, because we're more in favor of border security than you are. And I don't hear it. All I hear is, we're not giving you anything for the wall.
Got it. If I could add to that, Robert and Congressman Khanna, why are we not pointing out that if we were simply to reverse Reagan's 1986 change in policy and go back to, as we did during the Eisenhower administration, the Nixon administration, the Kennedy administration, prosecuting wealthy employers who hire people who are not, who don't have a legal right to be here, why don't we talk about that? And we're hitting a break right now. I'm sorry, I missed the cue on that.
Sure.
So we'll pick up your answer on the other side of the break. It's 45 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman Ro Khanna is taking your calls for the hour. His website, Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna. He's the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Congressman Khanna also represents the 17th District of California. We'll be right back with your calls for him. Welcome back, and Congressman, you want to take a bite at that, and then we'll just recap it real quickly in 4 minutes when we rejoin our commercial stations.
Well, I first of all completely agree with the caller and with you, Tom. The Democrats have been for border security and funding for border security. I hear the caller that message may not be getting through, and maybe I'll talk to Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer about introducing a bill. As the caller suggests, for $10, $15 billion. I mean, the immigration deal in 2013 had $40 billion for border security. I was on one of these conservative shows, and they said, well, Ro, you've got a family. Don't you think that you should keep intruders out? And I said, yes. And I said, I don't build a wall, though, around my house. I have an alarm system. So this idea that a wall is what's going to solve border security is just not correct. And we need to show our vision, and I'm sympathetic to the caller's point. And, Tom, I didn't know that about the Reagan change, but absolutely we need to be putting the finger of where the problem is with corporations that are abusing the laws, as Trump himself did for years before he decided to run for president. And that's really where the focus should be in enforcement.
Yeah, if you look at the numbers of people coming into the United States, prior to, I think it was '86 when they did that giant reform of the immigration laws and the amnesty for 5 or 6 million people. And prior to that, every year, about 1 million people would come into the United States just short of picking season, basically. They would work up and down the West Coast, by and large, and throughout the South. And then at the end of that season, they would go back to Mexico. And this was just a normal thing. The border was wide open. People would come across. They'd work. They'd go back. Eisenhower tried to put some sanity to this by the Bracero program that he rolled out, I think it was '56. And, where basically it was giving people kind of a work permit to be here. And then we learned that program was being terribly exploited because the employers were using the threat of taking away your Bracero card, which could be done with no judicial process, no due process at all, to force people for everything from working for free to sexual favors to all kinds of horrible other things. And so that program went away. But what Reagan did was, the most heavily unionized industries in the United States in 1986 were the construction industry and the meatpacking industries. And when Reagan stopped enforcing the law that you had, that white employers, wealthy white employers, could go to jail if they hired people like that. And what I've read, the argument to Reagan from his advisors was, this is how we're going to really break the unions. And just let all this labor flood in and no longer enforce the laws. And the two industries that first adopted this were aggressively, I mean, literally to the point of running ads in Spanish language newspapers, help wanted ads south of the border, were the construction industry and the meatpacking industry. And there's no more unions left in either one of those industries as a result of it. So.
And that law is on the books still. So you're saying that,
the law still says that white employers go to jail. But no president since Reagan changed the enforcement of that, just like he stopped enforcing the Sherman Act in '82, but it's still on the books. No president has started enforcing the Sherman Act aggressively. No president has gone back to enforcing the immigration law aggressively.
Well, actually, it's a really brilliant point, Tom, because it's common sense and it can appeal to folks and make the Democrats look reasonable and pragmatic about border security and say, look, we're going after the wrong people. Let's go after the wealthy corporations that are exploiting individuals and hurting our sovereignty for their own profits, and that we will prosecute them. I think it's
absolutely. We'll be right back. So would you like to watch the Thom Hartmann program, all 3 hours of our program, anytime you'd like? It's available. Would you like to hear special content where we talk about, what the billionaires are up to, or climate change, or the newest things in science? There's all kinds of great content like that. That's also available. The place to find all this is the Thom Hartmann channel over on Patreon. Patreon.com, Patreon.com. /Thom Hartmann, THOMHARTMANN, all run together. Patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. And there, when you become a supporter of the program through Patreon, you have access to the full 3-hour show every day, anytime you want, any place you want, and special content that we put up every single week that is unique specifically to our Patreon page. So check it out.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls here on the Thom Hartmann Program for the hour, khanna.house.gov. Congressman, just before the last break, 4 minutes ago, somebody had asked for an update on, as I recall, we were talking about an update on 676. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes.
Okay, you want to just give us a real quick recap of what Pramila Jayapal and Mark Pocan are doing on that?
Sure. 676 was the iconic single-payer bill that John Conyers had introduced for many, many years. It had the majority of the House caucus on it. It's being reintroduced and updated by Pramila Jayapal and Mark Pocan, the co-chairs of our Progressive Caucus. And what the bill is going to now include is coverage for long-term care, which we heard from so many people was missing. It's still missing in Medicare. It's going to include coverage for dental and vision and a better and faster transition. And so the details will be out within a couple weeks. We're going to have hearings for the first time in Congress on Medicare for All. It's going to make the Budget Committee one that is really to watch when those hearings are happening. And I welcome, for anyone listening out there, this is actually moving in Congress now. I'm not saying it's going to get passed, but it's actually finally captured the attention of the committees, and people are talking about it. This is your time to weigh in with any ideas you have, and we welcome constructive feedback when we'll release that draft bill.
Great. Dave at Vienna, Virginia, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Congressman, thank you very much. I wanted to ask, is there any consideration for compensating federal contractors? With this shutdown, it's really impacted them, and I understand it's hundreds of thousands of people.
You're absolutely right. Almost 1 million people, as I read. Not all, by the way, just low-wage workers. I mean, mid-wage, middle-class workers who are not going to get paid because they were furloughed and are independent contractors. Eleanor Norton Holmes has a bill that 42 of us are co-sponsors of that would provide them with the back pay for contractors. I believe that the leadership should take that up and pass it at least through the House so that people don't forget that there are a lot of Americans who were hurt and went without pay and aren't going to be made whole.
Jerry in Greensboro, North Carolina. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey, hi, Congressman. My name is Gerald Wong. I ran for Congress in the 6th District in North Carolina last year. And I was just curious, why aren't we putting out some kind of alternative to Trump's $5.7 billion for his wall? If you're really serious about the welfare, safety, and the crisis at the border, why don't we make them an offer? Rescind the Tax Cut and Jobs Act of last year, bump up the minimum wage to $15 an hour, and reinstitute a new corporate effective tax rate of 40%. And I'll listen off the air.
Well, I think we are all, as Democrats, for repealing the Trump tax cuts to the corporations and high earners, and that money could have been better spent on infrastructure, on Medicare for All, on a lot of on programs such as the Green New Deal. And I think you're right that the Democrats need to have our own agenda. And as the previous caller said, it should be also an agenda on border security, which could be a combination of we're actually going to prosecute and enforce the law with multinational corporations that are breaking it and hiring folks who are undocumented, and we're going to have new technology and immigration judges and censors and smart border security that's also humane, that's actually going to protect our country in a way that's consistent with our Constitution.
Great. Bob in Stark, Florida. Hey, Bob, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, I have a question. I think this is all a distraction by Trump and Republicans to take the wind out of the sails of Democrats, because he just throws out an arbitration number of $5.5 billion. As a retired aerospace manufacturing engineer, we had to work from blueprints and do cost analysis. So he just throws out this arbitration number. We don't know what the environmental impacts would be, and like if you were a rancher on the border, your barn may be on one side of the border and your house on the other. So we need to push the Republicans to do a cost analysis of what actual cost would be.
You're absolutely right. I mean, here's what they want to do. They want to get some money as a down payment, and so the president can go back to his base and say, I got the wall, and I'm going to keep building on the $5 billion I've got, because that's not nearly sufficient for the type of wall he wants to build. And we're not going to give him that. I mean, and that's not unreasonable. I mean, Barack Obama won. He probably would have done Medicare for All, and just because he was president, he didn't get it because he didn't have enough senators or House members. I mean, the president is not immune from the laws of politics. No one is stopping him from making a case to Congress and Senate, and if he can get 60 votes in the Senate and 219 votes in the House, he can have his wall. But he expects people to just bow down to his will. And this is, one of the points I made is this is the consequence of electing someone who's never even been on city council. I mean, one of the biggest things and criticisms, and this is why I believe no billionaire, maybe Trump has hopefully ruined it for every billionaire seeking to go straight to the presidency. You should have to do some public service so you understand that you have to compromise and you have to build consensus. And this country doesn't have a dictatorial system where the president just gets to do whatever he or she wants.
Yeah, and a lesson that hopefully Trump is absorbing. Congressman, thanks so much for being with us today.
I appreciate your having me always on.
It's such an honor, pleasure, and privilege to have you here with us and taking calls from people. I look forward to the next time. Congressman,
sounds great.
Thank you. Congressman Ro Khanna, his website, Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna. We'll be back. Medea Benjamin's going to drop by. We're going to talk about Venezuela, and then we'll get back to your calls and the other news of the day.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Those folks who support our program, who help essentially sponsor us on YouTube and on Patreon, have access to content, special content that is generally not available on YouTube or anyplace else. In exchange for supporting us at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, you get the whole 3-hour show, a video podcast that's not available to the general public, that you can watch anytime you want for every single show every day, plus special content that is not available anywhere else. The rant this week, 200,000 Americans have died from overdoses involving prescription opioids since 1996. So the question, what do we do with a company and the individuals who own that company and run that company that has been directly or indirectly responsible for the deaths of over 100,000 Americans? What do we do? We've got a serious problem with an out-of-control pharmaceutical industry in the United States, and we need and product liability in general. We need to do something about it. Years of strategy and struggle against the prison industrial complex. It's a collection of essays. This one is by David Gilbert on page 31, titled "The System Within the System, the Prison Industrial Complex and Imperialism." For those of us held behind locked gates within the walls and fences topped with razor wire, the corrections regime is the system that works tirelessly to impose total control over every aspect of our lives. Yet as ponderous and powerful as prisons are, they're only one part, a central girder, of a much bigger and more foreboding house of horrors, which can most accurately be named imperialism. The structural needs of the larger edifice set the specifications for the size and position of the girder. The strength of the girder helps determine how long the building itself will stand. We can't understand the explosion of imprisonment in the United States since 1971 without looking at an imperialism's urgent needs and goals of that period. By the same token, we can't develop an effective program around the prison industrial complex without grappling with the stresses and trends of the larger system of imperial rule. To be clear, before you take time to read this chapter, I don't offer any brilliant ideas on strategy. Those will most likely emerge from the organizing and activist efforts themselves. However, some of the concerns discussed may raise questions that go into forming strategy. I definitely look forward to learning from the dialogues that this generates on these issues. Imperialism may sound like the kind of rhetoric we want to avoid, but it's one word that needs to be rescued as the best way to name the system that rules over us. The basis of imperialism is the relentless quest for profits around the globe. Its most striking characteristic is the colossal and grotesque polarization of wealth. That polarization happens between nations, between the rich countries of the North and the impoverished ones of the global South, the impoverished countries of Africa, Latin America, and parts of Asia, and at the same time within each country based on class, race, and gender. The poles of dazzling wealth and abject poverty are intimately linked, as the former results from the ruthless plunder of the latter. This system is built on and intensifies all the major forms of oppression: patriarchy, capitalism, and white supremacy, all of which are structurally central. At the same time, imperialism highlights the global character of the system in a way that explains why the most intense oppression and resistance have been in the South, and that also provides the context for why the liberation struggles of the various people of color have been in the forefront within the U.S. There's no way to capture what the system costs in human life and potential, the pain and loss for all of us. Close to 1 billion human beings suffer chronic hunger, while another 2 billion face nutritional deficiencies. 1 billion lack access to clean drinking water. Just looking at children under the age of 5, imperialism is a holocaust in progress. Over 9 million die every year from easily preventable causes associated with poverty. The price for future generations may be even more severe as the rapaciousness of this global frenzy for profits threatens the very ecological basis for sustaining human life on any scale on our planet. Since most people won't accept living in squalor amid plenty, imperialism entails both the most sophisticated and the most brutal forms of social control. Its most salient feature is war, war after war after war, mainly against the peoples of the South. The domestic front line of such repression is a truly violent and harmful prison industrial complex. Today, 2,300,000 people are held behind bars, about 7 times the number in 1971. That explosion was unprecedented, coming after a 70-year period when the rates of imprisonment had remained more or less constant. This dramatic change did not result from some sudden skyrocketing of criminal activity, but rather from a radical expansion of what was designated as a crime and a draconian increase in the punishments for those crimes. Such extreme measures were driven by considerations way beyond criminal justice and often at cross purposes to the proclaimed goal of public safety. These destructive changes were born from crisis, one much more severe and protracted than the periodic ups and downs of the business cycles that occur over a roughly 10-year period, but rather a situation that threatened the very survival of the system. Such structural crises occur because capitalism is by its nature unstable. The economy is vast and complicated, but the major decisions are made by a tiny corporate and financial elite, with each thinking only of his own profits. When a structural crisis develops, the long-term institutional arrangements that assured a reliable flow of profits and the rule of capital no longer function. One dramatic example was the Great Depression of the 1930s, followed by World War II. At the end of that period, a new set of international institutions, such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, were created. At the same time, a new deal was hammered out for the terms of the bargain between capital and labor within the U.S. Those arrangements worked well for capital until they broke down a generation later. That new structural crisis, which emerged between 1968 and 73, is the seedbed for the burgeoning of the prison industrial complex and many related changes in U.S. history. The first and most obvious signs were political, as the resistance to imperialism crested in 1968. Abolition now.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
About preventing originals. The book The Inner Level by Wilkinson and Pickett.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, 6 minutes past the hour. And one of the people that I often turn to, particularly when it comes to international issues or conflicts, one of the people whose opinion I have the greatest respect for, is sometimes just only thought of as, you know, the kind of in-your-face performance artist activist that has made Code Pink so famous. But Medea Benjamin has written some just extraordinary, in-depth books and other writings on foreign policy. Her book, Kingdom of the Unjust, Behind the U.S.-Saudi Connection, is must-reading for everybody in America. Her analysis and understanding of what's going on in Cuba caused me to join a Code Pink group, Louise and I, to visit Havana last year. We had a wonderful time. I strongly encourage you to check them out. And so, you know, as things are falling apart, as the wheels are coming off in Venezuela, we reached out to Medea to see if she was also an expert or an authority in that part of the world, and she has considerable knowledge. So I wanted to bring her on and talk about it. Medea Benjamin is with us. Medea, welcome back to the program.
Hey, Tom. Good to be on with you.
It's great to have you, and I should add your Twitter handle is Medea, M-E-D-E-A, Benjamin. And people can, Code Pink, obviously, codepink.org or globalexchange.org. So we've got, Chavez dies. Maduro was his kind of number 2 guy. He becomes president. Then he runs for election, gets reelected recently, just in the last few months, I guess. And the United States and Canada, which is the part that really had me scratching my head, and a number of other countries, including some European countries, are actually recognizing the guy who ran against him. This would be the equivalent of countries saying, after the election here in November 2016, that's all very good that Donald Trump won the presidency, but Hillary Clinton got 3 million more votes than he did, and there's considerable evidence of illegal voter suppression across, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio. More people were thrown off the voting rolls than voted for Trump in those states, and so we're going to recognize Hillary Clinton as president of the United States. Or am I overstating this?
Well, maybe you should compare it to saying Nancy Pelosi should be head of state, because you can say our elections are quite fraudulent, and I would say with all the money in our elections, they're not very democratic. And then you could say that Donald Trump is incapable of running this government, and so Nancy Pelosi, we're going to declare her president. And some people might think, great, and I'm sure in Venezuela a lot of people are saying great. But you know what? That's not the way things should work.
Yeah, I'm with you. So what's happened in Venezuela and what's going on? How did we get to there, to this situation?
Well, it's important to recognize, Tom, that the economic situation is dire and that a lot of it has to be attributed to terrible mismanagement on the part of the government, corruption in the government. But we also have to recognize that a good part of it is also the economic sanctions. And when you hear the Trump administration talking about how much we care about the Venezuelan people, well, one good thing would be to lift the sanctions because they really are affecting the lives of ordinary people who are really hurting.
That's really interesting. Medea, one of the things that I learned years ago that just changed my thinking on all this is that there's basically two ways to produce inflation. One is to debase a currency, which is what Germany did in the early 30s. And happened in Zimbabwe, where the government intentionally devalues their own currency, and thus you have inflation. The other is to have a loss of an absolutely necessary part of your economy, typically a commodity. This is what happened in the United States in the 1970s, the Arab oil boycott, or embargo rather, and it made oil so scarce in the United States, the price of oil went to $100 a barrel. And the consequence of that was that produced inflation through the rest of the economy because pretty much everything runs on oil in the United States. So, but with our, I think they're talking 10,000% inflation in Venezuela. Is that the result of a government decision to debase their currency, or is that the result of our embargo causing certain necessary pieces of the economy, food, for example, or it could even be something as unusual but still, essential as toilet paper, that's just not available, and so the price is being driven up insanely, and that produces the inflation. What's going on? How's it happening?
Well, you hit the two of them, and then you implied the third, talking about the oil embargo. We have to also say that the price of oil went from over $100 a barrel till down to about 30. So the government lost a third of its revenue with the wild inflation of the oil market. Now, other countries have done a much better job at dealing with that. Venezuela had all these social programs that were initiated under Chavez that building 2 million new houses for people, allowing anybody who wanted to get free education all the way through college, free medical care, all of these things. And those expenses didn't go down, but when they had a third of the revenue that they had, and then with the U.S. sanctions, part of it is that Venezuela can't use the banking system. So its economy is totally crippled. And now the U.S. is saying that it's seizing Venezuelan assets and going to give them over to this parallel government that it created. That money, even separate from oil, the money that the Venezuelans had in England that was in gold reserves is now going to be given, they're saying, to this parallel government. According to the Venezuelans, I mean, who knows? We can't take those figures on face value, but they say that the U.S. economic sanctions in the last year alone has cost the economy $23 billion. Now, even if they exaggerated that, and it was half of that, it's many billions of dollars, which is why for many Venezuelans, when Mike Pompeo said, we care so much about Venezuela, we're going to give them in humanitarian aid $20 million, and them meaning not the present government, but this parallel government, many people in Venezuela said, wait a minute, you cost us over $20 billion, and now you're going to give us 20 million crumbs. So the situation is dire for a complex variety of reasons. The question really is how to move forward. And the way that the U.S. is proposing it now is really very, very scary. It seems to me like when you try to divide the military, and they're going home to home of people in the military saying, abandon the government, go with us, when the U.S. is helping to orchestrate this whole thing from Washington, when they bring in people like Elliot Abrams, who is known for his support of right-wing death squads, this is all leading in one direction, and that is towards a civil war in Venezuela. You have such a polarized society, Tom, with at least 6 million people who support the government and then millions of others who don't support the government. The only way out of this situation that's not going to be a violent one is through negotiations, and that's why the proposals put forward by Mexico and Uruguay are so critical, and we should be saying, yes, let's pull our support and give it to those two countries that have a very good reputation in Latin America and say we want them to be the mediators.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I understand also that now Russia is jumping into this act. If civil war were to break out in Venezuela, could it be like the Vietnamese War, where essentially it's a proxy war? It's the U.S. agents against Russian agents? And if so, what does that lead us to?
Imagine. I think the kind of horror that we're seeing in Syria could happen in Venezuela. And there are a number of people I've been talking to who hate the Maduro government, who are really worried about what they're calling the Syriazation of their country, because, as you say, Russia has a huge stake in Venezuela, as does China. Russia, because of the debt that Venezuela has, and Russia has lent them a massive amount of money, now owns 49.9% of Citgo, the Venezuelan oil company. And China has major investments and big debts that the Venezuelans owe. So there is a lot of economic interest at hand. Your listeners should know that Venezuela does have the world's largest oil reserves. So
even larger than Saudi Arabia?
Even larger than Saudi Arabia.
Wow.
So this is a place that people are not going to wipe their hands easily and say, oh, we'll let the U.S. figure this out. No, you have big countries like China and Russia who are standing behind Maduro. You also have division inside Latin America. When I was at the Organization of American States and got up at the end of Pompeo's talk to say, don't support a coup in Venezuela, there was a lot of applause in the room, because half of the countries now at the Organization of American States are supporting Maduro, and the other half are opposing him. So these splits are intense.
Wow. What can average Americans do? Call their senator at 202-224-3121 or their member of the House and say, here's my opinion, or what? I mean, is there...
You know, we elect these people precisely, I mean, to deal with our issues here at home, but also to be there when there are international crises and be level-headed about these things. And so far, only 6 members of Congress, that's in the House and the Senate, so out of 535, only 6 of them have so far come out with statements either calling for negotiations or non-intervention. And so we really need to get on them. There's a letter that's going to be released today from the office of Congressman Ro Khanna and Pramila Jayapal from the Progressive Caucus, and we need to get a lot of Congress people to sign on to that. So I would say, yes, call your congressperson and say, we want to hear from you, whether it's signing on to a letter, a statement from your office, a tweet, whatever it is, saying that you believe in the principle of non-intervention.
Yeah, sounds like a plan. Extraordinary. Medea Benjamin, activist, co-founder, Code Pink and Global Exchange. Her new book, which you must have, if you have not read Medea's book, Kingdom of the Unjust, Behind the U.S.-Saudi Connection, get it today. CodePink.org is the website. Medea Benjamin, at Medea, MEDEABENJAMIN, is her Twitter handle. Thanks so much, Medea.
Thanks for having me on, Tom.
Always great talking with you. I always learn something from you. I really appreciate it. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls. And I want to talk about the actual crisis that's happening in the United States right now that Donald Trump seems to want to ignore. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, refilling my water supply here. Bill in Sebastian, Florida. Hey, Bill, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's on your mind today?
Yeah, good afternoon, Tom. I'll withdraw from the International Court. Criminal Court has got me terribly upset. This paves the way for Elliott Abrams and the Negropontes and the Boltons and the Pompeos to do as they please, as they've done what they please to these poor migrants that they have interned in America. They don't have any recourse, and it upsets me terribly that that's what Trump is paving the way for, just more abuse, more inhumanity, and it upsets me terribly. And I've been on the phone to all the Congress people. I've called Ro Connor's office, Jeremiah Poll's office, as well as the one running for president. What's her name?
Well, there's a bunch of Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, Kirsten
Elizabeth Warren's office as well. And to me, she seems to be the most stable. Elizabeth Warren, she seems to have has examined this situation, and
her credentials as a progressive, much like Bernie's, are unimpeachable. They're absolutely solid. Bill, thank you. I agree with you. And withdrawing from the International Criminal Court, a huge mistake. Charles in Vancouver. Hey, Charles, what's up?
Hi, Tom. In your conversation with Ms. Benjamin, you were asking at a point, how can we, what should citizens do? Should they call their senators? Should they call their congressmen? I would just point out that over the last several decades ago, it took a long-distance phone call. It took pen and paper and a letter. Today, we have social media, particularly Twitter. A person can go into Twitter and they can begin to type a name, and they'll come up with an address almost immediately. It's there that we can vote immediately on anything that comes over.
So you're saying we should be tweeting at our elected representatives?
It's a means of voting immediately on something that's going on, and to that end, what are Twitter metrics? They are tracking everything that they are tracking that data. And believe me, our representatives and senators, their staff are looking at the Twitter metrics.
Very interesting. So if you've got a message you want to get to Congressman Ro Khanna, for example, who was just with us for a whole hour taking people's calls, you just go into Twitter, type in the @ sign and RO, and probably Ro Khanna will pop right up.
In most every instance that I go in there, within a few characters, I have the address of the person I want to communicate with.
Are you finding, Charles, that when you try to communicate with those people that you're getting any kind of response?
Sometimes, yes, it generates a conversation, but I go back to what I said a moment ago. Twitter creates metrics.
Right.
And I guarantee you staff is following those metrics if they have an account for their representative or senator.
Absolutely. Have you tried this on Facebook or Instagram?
No, I don't use Facebook too much anymore with my understanding of what their CEO is doing and compromises of data and so forth. But Twitter, I'm satisfied with. Instagram, I haven't been on before.
Interesting. Charles, thanks for the call. Excellent point. Excellent point. And we should all be doing that. Great to hear from you, and thanks for watching us or listening to us, however it was. I think you were on Free Speech TV. It's 24 minutes past the hour, 22 and a half minutes past the hour. We'll be right back with more of your calls and the news. Right after this. So would you like to watch the Thom Hartmann program, all 3 hours of our program, anytime you'd like? It's available. Would you like to hear special content where we talk about, what the billionaires are up to, or climate change, or the newest things in science? There's all kinds of great content like that. That's also available. The place to find all this is the Thom Hartmann channel over on Patreon. Patreon.com, Patreon.com. /Thom Hartmann, THOMHARTMANN, all run together. Patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. And there, when you become a supporter of the program through Patreon, you have access to the full 3-hour show every day, anytime you want, any place you want, and special content that we put up every single week that is unique specifically to our Patreon page. So check it out.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
/Tom. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. The real crisis in America, right? This Axios this morning put this out, and it's just, very, very straightforward stuff. Donald Trump is saying, oh, you got all these brown people at the border, and they're coming to America, and they're doing murder and rape. Well, we don't have any reports of immigrant-caused crimes in the United States last week. If there were, you can bet that they would have showed up on Fox News with screaming breaking news headlines. Immigrant found to have shot so-and-so. Immigrant found to have raped so-and-so. It happens periodically. It happens maybe once or twice a month. But this is just, it didn't happen last week as far as anybody can tell. But this is what did happen, according to the Axios newsletter this morning. Sheriff's Department armored SWAT vehicle arrives at the SunTrust Bank in Sebring, Florida, where 5 young women were killed Wednesday. I'm not sure they were all young, but 5 women were killed Wednesday. Yesterday, authorities in Louisiana said they're searching for an armed, dangerous 21-year-old accused of killing his parents and 3 others in separate but related shootings. Yesterday, 3 men were shot and killed in southeast Washington, D.C. D.C. Police Chief Peter Newsom said in a separate incident earlier in the day, another homicide was reported in the Northeast. On Friday, a male St. Louis police officer was charged with involuntary manslaughter in the shooting death of a female officer in what was described as a game of Russian roulette. On Thursday, a gunman opened fire at a hotel bar near Penn State's main campus, killing 2 men and wounding a woman, broke into a stranger's house, fatally shot the 83-year-old homeowner, and then killed himself. Also on Thursday, authorities in Georgia are looking for a pair of 27-year-old gunmen who they say killed 4 people and wounded a man in a pair of shootings. On Wednesday, a man accused of fatally shooting 5 women at a small-town bank in Florida had dreamed of hurting classmates in high school and long been fascinated with killing. On Tuesday, a man is under arrest in Utah after police say he posted on Facebook about killing as many girls as I can see. That same weekend that the women's marches were held around the U.S., this guy positioned himself or identified himself as an incel, as an involuntarily celibate young man, 27 years old, never had sex with anybody. He's blaming women for this, and he's going to kill them. This is a real crisis. The incels, the guns, the killing, all of this stuff. This is an actual crisis. Guns in America right now are an actual crisis. You got 30,000, 34,000 people a year being shot in the United States. Half of all gun shootings are suicides. Fatal gun shootings are suicides in the United States. I mean, this is serious stuff that we need to be paying attention to right now. Anyhow, we'll pick up your calls on the other side of the news here at the bottom of the hour. There's an awful lot that we've been talking about from Congressman Khanna having been with us for a full hour to our first hour talking about, Howard Schultz, and is it time to say no to third-party candidates? I think it is.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back with your calls and more of the news of the day right after this. Threshold, the progressive plan to pull America back from the brink by Thom Hartmann. And this is from Chapter 2, The Economy. The epigraph Woody Guthrie's saying, some men rob you with a 6-gun, others rob you with a fountain pen. The title, the opening part of this chapter, The Coup of the Elites. The election of 1992 pitted Bill Clinton against George H.W. Bush. While Bush was running as a conservative who was compassionate enough to hope for 1,000 points of privatized non-governmental light, Clinton campaigned as an unabashed FDR, believing in government as a solution liberal. In language reminiscent of Teddy Roosevelt's Progressive Square Deal and FDR's Progressive New Deal, Clinton proposed a new covenant between the U.S. government and U.S. citizens. In a speech at Georgetown University on October 23, 1991, he declared, "We've got to rebuild our political life before the demagogues and the racists and those who pander to the worst in us bring this country down. People once looked at the president and the Congress to bring us together, to solve problems, to make progress. Now, in the face of massive challenges, our government stands discredited, our people are disillusioned. There's a hole in our politics where our sense of common purpose used to be. To turn America around, we've got to have a new approach, founded on our most sacred principles as a nation, with a vision for the future. We need a new covenant, a solemn agreement between the people and their government to provide opportunity for everybody, inspire responsibility throughout our society, and restore a sense of community to our great nation. A new covenant to take government back from the powerful interests in the bureaucracy and give it back to the ordinary people of our country." More than 200 years ago, our founding fathers outlined our first social compact between government and the people, not just between lords and kings. More than 100 years ago, Abraham Lincoln gave his life to maintain the union that compact created. More than 60 years ago, Franklin Roosevelt renewed that promise with a New Deal that offered opportunity in return for hard work. Today, we need to forge a new covenant that will repair the damaged bond between the people and their government, restore our basic values, embed the idea that a country has the responsibility to help people get ahead, but that the citizens have not only the right, but the responsibility to rise as far and fast as their talents and determination can take them. And most important of all, that we're all in this together. We have to make good on the words of Thomas Jefferson, who once said, "A debt of service is due from every man to his country, proportional to the bounties which nature and fortune have measured to him." End of quote from Bill Clinton. Americans loved it. A majority of voters in 1992 were old enough to remember what America was like under the 1940 to 1981 New Deal era, when a single worker with a good job had health care, a pension, and could raise a family and buy a home. When the GI Bill educated millions. When hospitals and health insurance companies in nearly every state were required by law to be not-for-profit corporations, and health care was inexpensive and widely available. And they noticed that the 12 years of Reagan and Bush had begun the process of shattering that historic era, that the middle class was slipping away, the government had become remote and hostile rather than protecting the rights of workers and the middle class. Americans elected Clinton based on his FDR-style rhetoric. They were looking forward to a return to the golden age of America's middle class. They were ready for the new covenant, and apparently so was Bill Clinton. There is every sign that he actually believed his own rhetoric. On all this, he won the election in November and spent that month and December preparing his new covenant programs to restore the American middle class. Until January. As Adam Curtis brilliantly points out in a special documentary series he did for the BBC titled The Trap, a few weeks before Bill Clinton was to be sworn into office as President of the United States, he was visited by Goldman Sachs CEO Robert Rubin, who had just taken a $40 million paycheck for his last year with Goldman and would soon become the head of Clinton's economic team tasked with carrying out the new covenant, and with Alan Greenspan. Rubin and Greenspan sat the young new president down and told him the facts of life as they saw them. Clinton would not govern as an FDR liberal. Instead, he must cut government, promote free trade, and reduce regulation of business. Clinton complied and has been richly rewarded. In his second inaugural address, he declared, "The era of big government is over." The philosophy represented by Rubin and Greenspan doesn't believe in government as a solution to much of anything other than wars and crime. As true classical conservatives in the mold of Sir Edmund Burke and Thomas Hobbes, many modern libertarians and neoliberals don't even believe in democracy. As any libertarian will honestly admit, they call it the tyranny of the majority, or mob rule. Instead, because they believe in the inherently evil nature of most humans, they held that a small ruling elite of good people, the wise ones, must concentrate wealth and power, the first fuels the second by and large, in a small number of hands, out of the reach of what the first American conservative President John Adams called the rabble, us. They believed that social stability was more important than social mobility. As of this writing, the surest way to become wealthy in the United States or Britain is to be born to wealthy parents. The surest way to be poor is to be born to poor parents. Social mobility, the ability to move between classes for better or worse, has been rolled back from its highly fluid levels in the 1940 to 1980 years to a rigidity last measured in the 1920s as America was sliding into the Republican Great Depression. Conservatives from Sir Edmund Burke's opposition to the Revolutionary War of 1776 to today's opponents of labor rights believe that too much power and wealth in the hands of the middle class will inevitably lead to instability. The book, Threshold, The Progressive Plan to Take America Back from the Brink.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Well, boy, talk about a crazy alert. This is our the crazy alert for the day. If you're 3 years old and you're out in freezing snow and rain and sleet, and it's coming down so hard and it's so cold and it's so bad that even the volunteer searchers and the professional searchers, the police and fire department looking for this 3-year-old kid in the woods, say, we can't do this anymore. We've got to go home. We're going to die. How does a little kid, a 3-year-old who's not dressed for the winter, stuck in the woods, survive 2 full days? 2 full 24-hour periods, 2 nights in the woods. It actually happened. This actually happened. This is in North Carolina. This kid was lost in sub-zero temperatures, 3 years old. And when they finally, he came back, and when they found him, he said that, and it was in the low 20s Fahrenheit. I mean, it was well below freezing for 2 days. This little kid says a bear took him in and he used its body heat to keep him alive, apparently. It's amazing. And yeah, there's lots of black bears in the area. You know, the Native Americans used to, in some tribes, used to refer to black bears to bears as grandfather or grandmother. Yeah, I think so. That's an amazing, crazy alert. Thank you, Shira. Howard in New York City. Hey, Howard, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi. I understand how to shut down a shutdown, but I don't understand what the government can do if he declares a national emergency. Can Congress do anything to stop that?
Yes, they can override him.
With what? Just straight legislative votes?
That's correct. If Trump declares a national emergency, both the House and Senate can vote, and it's simple majority votes in both cases, can vote to overrule his national emergency. So
if he vetoes it, they need a veto-proof margin. Is that right?
To the best of my knowledge, Howard. We'll see how this plays out, because it's looking. I mean, the reports are now that Nancy Pelosi is still saying there's no way he's getting a wall. Thanks, Howard. And he's saying, well, maybe I'll do a national emergency then. In fact, he's asked for the advice of his legal counsel on that. So we'll see what happens. Conrad in Ramona, California. Hey, Conrad, what's on your mind today?
The way we did before. That's got to be the first words out of every Democrat's or progressive's mouth when someone asks, how are we going to pay for free college? How are we going to pay for Social Security? How are we going to pay for a new freeway system? The way we did before.
Right. And we need our politicians when people like Howard Schultz and whatnot, when these very rich people, or particularly these Republicans, come out and go, oh, if you raise taxes, I'm going to have to leave the country. I mean, this is just, I'm one of the job creators, and you can't do that. And this is through the 360 here, Sean. This is what FDR had to say about that.
A number of my friends who belong in the very high upper brackets have suggested to me on several occasions of late that if I am reelected president, they will have to move to some other nation because of high taxes here. Now, I will miss them very much.
There you go. And that's got to be our response, Conrad.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Conrad, for the call. It's great to hear from you. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's up?
Yeah, and how are we paying for it now is the way I would respond to the last caller.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk to Congressman Rokon about, and you've had a guest on recently that says tell personal stories. Okay, so let's talk about Medicare for all. My mom, week before last, had to go into the hospital for an emergency surgery. It wasn't serious. It was something she knew she had to have done, but it came to a crisis point, so she had to go.
Mm.
and took an ambulance to the hospital. And while she was there, because she went in an ambulance, did not bring, of course, her medications with her. One of her medications, because she has asthma, my mom is 90 years old, is now they're recommending a corticosteroid inhaler rather than the albuterol that is so common, the thing those of us that have asthma carry in our pockets.
Mm.
But these steroid inhalers are very expensive. They're about $225. They have 120 puffs in them, and believe me, that's 120, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, since she didn't have her inhaler with her, they kind of gave her one. They let her use one. 2 puffs in the morning, 2 puffs at night. The nurse brought the inhaler, and they charged her by the puff.
And it wasn't $2 a puff, was it?
No, it was. I think it was about $12.50 a puff. Because why? Because you have to have the nurse bring it to you. So the nurse brings it in the morning. Take your 2 puffs. They write it down. They charge her for each puff. She was there 4 days. 16 puffs out of 120 is what she used, and then they threw the rest of it away.
Wow!
Because someone's already puffed on this.
That's
and
bizarre.
Medicare got charged.
That's bizarre.
For throwing away 85% of a very expensive medication. This has got to change.
Yeah, I'm with you, Paul.
And they say Medicare is going broke. Well, if you have laws that regulate drugs that way in favor of the drug companies, you throw away 85% of it. And that's like if you buy a bottle of wine in a restaurant and they charge you by the glass, and whatever you don't drink, they throw the rest away. Come on.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Paul. And I don't know that this is a natural or legal or procedural extension of the Medicare Part D that Billy Townsend shepherded through Congress, which was a $600 billion subsidy to the big pharma industry, allowing them to spend a fortune on national television advertising now. So all we see are drug ads all the time. I don't know if there's a connection between the two, or if this is merely kind of in the spirit of. But spot on. That stinks. Paul, thanks a lot for the call. Dan in Waterloo, Canada. Hey, Dan, what's up?
Hey, I just wanted to know if you had an opinion on why the media is pushing so hard on Democrats to give something on this wall. They're not pushing Republicans at all. And, like, if you saw the way they talked to Nancy Pelosi, they asked her, so what about the wall? And she said, had I not been clear on the wall?
Right.
And the reporter actually said, no. So she said, yes, I've been clear on the wall. There is no wall.
Right.
And it's just they're constantly pushing on them. What are you willing to give? What are you willing to give? Do you understand that?
Yeah, I do, and the media in this country has a solid Republican bias. It always has. I mean, look on any of the Sunday shows, for example. You'll see more Republicans than Democrats. You know, Democrats started seriously complaining about this in the early 2000s, particularly when the Republicans were all cranking up the enthusiasm to go to war with Iraq. And the network said, well, we've got to have more Republicans than Democrats on our news stories and on our Sunday shows because the Republicans are in power and people want to hear from who's in power. So then Obama becomes president for 8 years, and during those entire 8 years, every Sunday or virtually every Sunday, there were more Republicans than Democrats, and very rarely any genuine progressives at all on the Sunday shows. And they asked the networks again, why do you have more Republicans than Democrats on? And the network said, well, because the Republicans are out of power. And so people need to hear from the group that's out of power. And, you know, they're the loyal opposition. Americans want to know what's going on. The bottom line is that these are giant corporations. These are multi-billion-dollar corporations, Dan. And you know, with multi-millionaires running them. You know, the guy who ran CBS, Les Moonves, who left with a $120 million golden parachute, who was finally taken away from him. But I mean, this is how bizarre this guy is. He had 2 full-time employees at CBS, young women whose only job was to come to his office whenever he wanted, lock the door, and service him sexually at any random time throughout the day. 2 full-time employees. This was their job. I mean, this is how bizarre the world of the media elite right now is. And, you know, it's just really unfortunate, but it's time to bring the Sherman Act to every industry in America and restore some genuine competition. Dan, thanks for the call. Michael in Oakland, California. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Tom, I'm really upset with Trump, so I'll say that first.
Okay.
But I'm really kind of confused with South America.
Mm-hmm.
South America is in the Americas, and this fool is talking about common sense, and he's letting these people starve the same way he did with the people who he just put out on strike. You know, he made them strike. He made them not go to work. You know, he says common sense. This man has no sense. There's something wrong with this guy. We have to get him off of there. We have to get him out of there.
Would you rather have Mike Pence, Michael?
I beg your pardon?
Would you rather have Mike Pence?
Please. Mike Pence is up to his eyebrows, and just like Sean said on Rachel.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to keep all this perspective. I've been watching this for almost 3 years. You know, I broke out in hives just last month. I had to go to the hospital because the doctor said it was turn off the TV.
Wow.
You understand?
Well,
So
maybe
what
you
I
should
did
turn
was-
off the TV then, Michael. It's time to take up,
He's on
jogging or
everything,
something.
Tom. The man's on everything. He's infiltrating
You're right.
our minds every day, you know?
Yeah.
So I have to turn him off. But it's impossible to get away from this demon. He's the devil's disciple. That's who he is. He has no spirit at all. That's why he sits up there like he's some kind of king or something. It really pisses me off. Let me stop.
Yeah.
It pisses me off just to see this personality. He's a fraud.
Yeah.
He's a charlatan.
I get it, Michael. I agree with you. I agree with all that. And there's a certain kind of core psychological survival mechanism, and that is don't stick to him. This is the old tar baby story from Uncle Remus. Do not stick to your opponent. And the way that you stick yourself to somebody is through hate, it's through obsession, it's through fear. We need to let go of all those things and just say no. We're not going to embrace Donald Trump that way. Michael, thank you for the call. I get it. It's very upsetting to me as well. We'll be back. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We're going to check in with Talk Media News in about 4 minutes. So stick around, and we'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And we will be checking in with Talk Media News to end the show in about 4 minutes here. Stick around. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Carlos in Ontario, Canada. Hey, Carlos, what's on your mind today?
Oh, good afternoon, Tom. Good afternoon. Okay, I'm going to make it quick, Tom, because this is my issue here. I truly believe in non-foreign intervention in any country whatsoever. But the situation in Venezuela is totally different. You have the Cuban intervention that nobody talk about it. You have the fact that Maduro on January 10 vacated his post as a president. Also, he had the fact that he put his own Supreme Court. He basically took away his political opponent in the last election. And now we got the way I see it, I don't see any other solution. And
yeah, it's kind of like, so what you're saying, Carlos, it's sort of like Daniel Ortega, who 40 years ago was arguably a good guy, but now has become just an absolute dictator in either Guatemala or Honduras. I forget which country. Well, and you're saying that basically Maduro has done the same thing. He's no longer the people's friend.
Well, no, Tom, he never was.
Okay.
In the case of Maduro, I give it to you. Chavez, yes, he was popular. Maduro never was. He was never popular.
Yeah. Carlos, it's a discussion that I don't know enough to essentially debate you on this topic, but I do know that Venezuela is a real mess, and hopefully we can work some of this stuff out. Carlos, thank you for the call. Don in Akron, Ohio, watching Free Speech TV. Hey, Don, what's up?
Well, I have a minor disagreement with you. Usually, I think you're right on, but this is about the third party issue. I think back in the 1920s, there was a precedent for third parties actually being largely responsible for Roosevelt's policies.
You're talking about the Bull Moose Party?
Well,
Teddy Roosevelt's activities back in the 19-teens?
No, not Teddy, but Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
What am I missing?
Well, there were a couple of socialist parties. There were labor unions. There was Communist Party. There were what we would today call the left was quite strong, and because of the pressure that these groups and political parties pushed on to threaten, actually, Roosevelt with, I think caused him to move in the direction that he took. I gather this from listening to Dr. Richard Wolff, who I think is pretty accurate on most things, and I think the strategy that we could learn from it is that third parties, Greens, socialists, whatever you want to call them, progressive parties could support Democratic candidates.
Well, this is the point I made earlier on, was that sometimes third parties actually move the conversation, and sometimes they can be very useful. And in New York State, which is where Roosevelt was, that was his power base, that's particularly true because they have fusion voting. So you can vote on the liberal ticket in New York and for a Democrat, for a Democratic candidate. But, that said, I don't see where a third party run by Howard Schultz is going to help anybody.
Well, no, not a billionaire. No, I'm thinking more someone like Cortez or people who are. But the thing is, if there is not a way to move the Democrats to a progressive direction, I think they should very conspicuously.
Yeah, well, I think the Democrats are being moved within the party by progressives like Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders. Don, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you 10 minutes before the hour. And on the line with us is Bob Ney. This report, Talk Media News Report, brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Ellen Ratner's new book, Loving What You Do. On the line with us, Congressman Bob Ney, the author of Sideswiped, the definitive insight into how D.C. really works. Bob, welcome back to the program. What's going on in the world today?
Well, thank you, Tom. Of course, the shutdown ended temporarily for now, as we all know by now. And I think it was a telling moment when Senator Schumer, who, of course, is the minority leader of the Senate, received more votes than the president's measure. And that should have, of course, told the White House that they had a problem. Mm-hmm. And now they'll be trying to figure out what else on earth they will do as the deadline approaches for the 15th. Now, there is going to be basically a type of, I'll call it a conference committee, House and Senate members from both sides of the aisle. And as I understand it, they're going to take some testimony on border security. And then they will be preparing basically for what happens after the 15th, because it just went a couple of weeks, and then they're going to have to do something else.
All right.
So there'll be some intense.
In other words, this is like in anticipation of Trump trying to shut the government down again if he throws another tantrum around his wall?
Correct.
Wow.
And so they're doing it's really, Tom, it's basically a sort of unusual move, because they have passed a measure over which he has signed, and then it reopens the government temporarily instead of going all the way to October the 1st, which would normally be what normally happens. It goes to February 15th, and they are, I guess, anticipating, of course, that by the 15th, before that, they have to have some type of bill. The Congress does,
right?
And so they're going to hold hearings on border security.
Yeah, well, that's the normal and legitimate process, and a good thing that they're doing it. Bob, my understanding is that if Trump declares a state of national emergency and then tries to move Army money around, for example, to put it down on the wall, that Congress, both the House and the Senate, have the ability with a simple majority vote to declare that the state of emergency no longer exists. Am I right about that? And if so, is there a discussion going on about what to do and in that context?
Now, there is one problem with it. Of the 100, and if I'm doing this from memory, Tom, so of the 136 different avenues he potentially could take to acquire money, there are, where he really needs to acquire money, the 16 different ways they could step in and say, no, you can't do that. There are some other avenues he could use where they technically could still step in, but would have probably not as much authority to do it. Let me
they being Congress.
Yes, they being Congress. Let me give you one example. He can declare an emergency, and then he can begin to take up to $80 million from a Pentagon fund to begin the construction of, quote, the wall, the barrier, or, you know, the paper mache, whatever they're going to do.
Yeah.
And the Congress really, it could take some action, but wouldn't have as much legitimacy as if he went another route and began to take monies from other agencies. So yes, you're right that they can step in and undo it. There are some tricks up his sleeve he could use, but again, it would be only $80 million, which is not enough to even probably do the design of the wall, right? So he would have to seek some other sources, and yes, they could step in and do something. Here's one other problem he has now. If he declares an emergency, and the Congress, let's say they don't have the votes in the Senate to do anything about it, okay? And he declares an emergency, you know, federal judges in making decisions do read information that they acquire, you know, because obviously people fighting this would bring information. And if he declared that emergency and that night in the Oval Office said national emergency, why has he waited this amount of time to do it? So, therefore, he's taken away his legitimacy by even waiting to the point that we're speaking right now. If it was an emergency, why didn't he do it 5 weeks ago? 6 weeks ago?
There's an old cliche in business, Bob, that as a director or a CEO or a manager, it's really important to know the difference between important and urgent. Some things are important but not urgent. Other things are urgent but really not all that important. And Trump has been portraying this wall, this border crisis in quotes, as both important and urgent, whereas I think it is important that we talk about, you know, border security and we talk about immigration in general. But the urgency, I mean, he's just trying to trump this up, you know, pun intended.
Yes, and so he's hurt himself in actually that move now. It should have been done, you know, 5 weeks ago.
Right.
There is one other thing where he's really hurt himself, which I agree with you that this would probably force the Republicans to actually step in and undo something he's going to do, because he has now offset the entire boost from his point of view, or Republican point of view, from the Trump tax cuts. That's what he's done. So according to their own projections, the White House's own projections, the government shutdown that just ended has already eroded any impact of tax reform and spending increases that he signed in 2017.
Right.
Now, this is coming from the council, the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, Kevin Hassett, and he said himself that the shutdown reduces quarterly annualized economic growth by 0.13 percentage points for every week it lasts.
So kiss your sugar high goodbye.
Right, and this is from their side. This isn't coming from a Democratic side. So if he does this again towards February 15th, he's going to have a knee-jerk reaction, obviously, from the Republicans who are trying to run on great benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. Bob Day, author of Sideswiped, reporter with Talk Media News. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Tom.
Always great talking with you. I always learn something from Bob, too. It's extraordinary. Well, thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place, for more of the news and events of the day. In the meantime, please know, not only is there no room for despair here, but we've got to get active. The future of our republic depends, in part, on you showing up to participate. So please, get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.